Chapter 8:14. What's that? A Mount Spirit tool can actually block Yimu's blade? Countless old ancestors in the northern Mang Palace were shocked to see Yimu's blade being easily broken by the war dragon treasured carriage. Yimu's old ancestor was no longer someone who had just transcended life and death. His realm had already surpassed the life-shattering realm and reached the second step of the life and death steps, the undying realm. Not to mention a life and death realm martial artist, even a life-shattering realm martial artist would have to pay a huge price to block his blade. However, the war dragon treasured chariot was actually able to easily block it. Heaven-grade spirit tool. This carriage is also a heaven-grade spirit tool. This guy actually had another opportunity. The grade of this carriage isn't below the ancestral dragon's supreme sword. What kind of spirit tool is it? Some old ancestors looked at Chu Fengmian with jealousy. They were all old ancestors of North Mang Academy, people who had transcended life and death. Even in the 9 regions, they would have a high status and be respected. But Chu Fengmian was only a life and death realm martial artist, and yet he had such a powerful spirit tool. Normally, these old ancestors could only have some ordinary heaven-grade spirit tools. They weren't qualified to have heaven-grade spirit tools like the ancestral dragon supreme sword and the battle dragon carriage. But Chu Fengmian was only a life and death realm martial artist and a disciple of North Mang Academy. Not only did he have the ancestral dragon supreme sword, but he also had the battle dragon carriage. How could these old ancestors not be jealous? Especially the old ancestors of Yi clan. They couldn't wait to kill Chu Fengmian and take all his treasures. Yimu, you want to kill me? What a joke. So what if you're in the life and death realm? In front of me, you're just an ant. Die. Chu Fengmian looked at Yimu's old ancestor and suddenly laughed. Beneath him, the 8 primordial war dragons on the war dragon treasure chariot suddenly roared and charged towards Patriarch Yimu. Rumble. It was so fast that in an instant, a beam of light pierced through Patriarch Yimu's chest. A primordial ancient roared and slashed out with its claw. The Patriarch's chest was shattered, and he was sent flying dozens of kilometers away. After the collision, even Yimu, who was in the undying realm, was severely injured. Vice Dean Deng Ling, who was standing beside Chu Fengmian, had a dumbfounded expression. Everything that was happening before his eyes was simply beyond his expectations. It wasn't just Lu Qianren. Even Night Herder couldn't fight back against Chu Fengmian. A mere disciple was enough to beat up an ancestor who transcended life and death. If he hadn't seen all of this with his own eyes, no one in the 9 regions would have believed it even if it was spread out. What terrifying power! What is the origin of this treasured carriage? 8 primordial war dragons pulling the chariot with a canopy covering it. Is this the most valuable treasure of 9 Demons City, the heavenly demon treasure carriage? One of the progenitors suddenly yelled. He seemed to have seen through the true identity of the war dragon treasure carriage. In the 9 regions, such a treasured carriage couldn't possibly be a nameless existence. After thinking about it for a moment, he suddenly shouted out loud, "What? What? It's the heavenly demon treasure carriage? Isn't this the most valuable treasure of 9 Demon City? Isn't it the carriage of 9 Demons City's demon lord? How did it fall into this kid's hands? I heard that this time, the little demon lord of 9 Demon City also entered the returning ruins sky. I'm afraid that he brought the heavenly demon treasure carriage with him. But in the end, he died in the hands of this kid and obtained it. Good luck. This kid's luck is simply heaven-defying. Such a treasure has fallen into his hands." Each of the elders looked at Chu Fengmian with a different gaze. Some were emotional, some were excited, some were greedy, and some were filled with killing intent. This kid's strength is too terrifying. Even an undying realm expert is no match for him when he controls the carriage. Is he really a life and death realm expert? Chu Fengmian sat quietly on the war dragon chariot after dealing with Night Shepherd Patriarch. At this moment, The progenitors who were clamoring to kill Chu Fengmian were all silent. If Chu Fengmian was only a life and death realm expert, it would be easy to deal with him. For these progenitors, life and death realm experts were like ants. They could do whatever they wanted with them. But now, Chu Fengmian's strength was no different from them. This kind of strength was enough to be on equal footing with them. Even if they wanted to deal with Chu Fengmian, it wouldn't be an easy task. Countless progenitors looked at Chu Fengmian with flickering eyes. They were all thinking about something. Now that Chu Fengmian was called to the Northern Mang Palace, it was actually because of the Yi clan. Chu Fengmian had killed Yi Tianjun. This matter was known to all the ancestors present, so the Yi clan had always wanted to deal with Chu Fengmian. If Chu Fengmian's strength wasn't enough, they wouldn't mind doing Yi clan a favor and come forward to deal with Chu Fengmian. But now, Chu Fengmian's strength was enough to be on equal footing with them. He even surpassed some of the progenitors present. If they were to go against Chu Fengmian, they would be provoking an opponent like Chu Fengmian. To them, this wasn't a wise choice. Chu Fengmian, how dare you? Kneel down. How dare you be so arrogant in front of so many progenitors in the Northern Mang Palace? Yi Zongxing looked at Chu Fengmian with flickering eyes and suddenly roared. No matter how strong you are now, you're just a disciple of our North Sea Academy. It's a matter of course for the ancestor to teach a disciple a lesson. However, you went against the ancestor and even injured 2 ancestors. You're simply unruly and unruly, you're a devil. Progenitors, I implore you to give the order to capture this kid. Such a person can't be allowed to stay in our Northern Mang Academy. Unruly? Devil? Why, only your Yi clan is allowed to kill me and I can't resist. Chu Fengmian looked at Yi Zongxing with a sarcastic smile. Moreover, I'm just a disciple. Northern Mang Academy has always respected strength. Why is it that I'm not worthy of being called an ancestor with my strength? You haven't transcended life and death, so you can only be a disciple of our Northern Mang Academy. I'm the vice principal of the Northern Mang Academy. When you see me, you must kneel down and speak. Yi Zongxing looked at Chu Fengmian and shouted coldly. Is that so? Chu Fengmian raised the corner of his mouth and said contemptuously. Unfortunately, in my opinion, even you, the vice principal, are just trash. Chapter 8:15. Chu Fengmian, you. Vice President Deng Ling's voice trembled when she heard Chu Fengmian's words. She hurriedly said to Chu Fengmian, Chu Fengmian, do you want to die? How dare you speak to the vice principal like that? Hurry up and beg for mercy. That's the only way to save your life. Vice Principal Deng Ling tried to dissuade Chu Fengmian while sending him a telepathic message. Kid, Yi Zongxing isn't the same as Yi Mu. As the vice principal of Northern Mang Academy, he has already reached the unblemished state. You're no match for him. Hurry up and apologize. Given your strength, the ancestors can't really kill you. So what if I'm in the unblemished state? Chu Fengmian's disdain didn't change after hearing Vice Principal Deng Ling's words. He was naturally aware of Yi Zongxing's realm, but so what? Yi Zongxing, in my opinion, you're worse than a dog. How can you be the vice principal of Northern Mang Academy? You say I'm not strong enough? Alright, then do you dare to come and fight me? Chu Fengmian pointed at Yi Zongxing and spoke word by word. If you can't even defeat a small disciple like me, then you really aren't qualified to be the vice principal of Northern Mang Academy. Uproar. Chu Fengmian's words made the expressions of countless ancestors change, one after another. Many of them could see that Chu Fengmian had come here to show off and slap the Yi family's face. Defeating Lu Qianren and Yi Mu was already a slap to the Yi family's face. But now, Chu Fengmian didn't stop and wanted to fight Yi Zongxing. Yi Zongxing could be considered a well-known figure among the countless ancestors of the Yi family. As the vice principal of Northern Mang Academy, he had a high status among the countless ancestors. Now, Chu Fengmian's words had forced Yi Zongxing into a dead end. If he said Chu Fengmian wasn't strong enough, then Chu Fengmian would have to show his strength. That brat is crazy. Yi Zongxing is far from someone like Yi Mu's old ancestor. Forget it. This kid has encountered countless fortuitous encounters at such a young age. It's normal for him to be proud and arrogant. I'll just let him suffer this loss. However, I'm afraid that Yi Zongxing won't show any mercy. Let's hope that this kid can survive from Yi Zongxing. Countless elders looked at Chu Fengmian and shook their heads. Many of them felt that Chu Fengmian was too reckless. Chu Fengmian had defeated Lu Qianren and Yi Mu. He had already achieved his goal. Now, as long as he admitted defeat, Yi Zongxing would have no reason to deal with Chu Fengmian. At that time, Chu Fengmian would rise to the position of patriarch and his status would skyrocket. It would not be easy for the Yi clan to deal with Chu Fengmian. But now, Chu Fengmian was actually challenging Yi Zongxing. This was indeed a reckless thing to do. Kid, you want to challenge me? Yi Zongxing looked at Chu Fengmian. His expression didn't change, but he was overjoyed. Chu Fengmian came to Beimang Palace and showed off his strength. He had no way to deal with Chu Fengmian. He could only use his status to threaten Chu Fengmian. Now that Chu Fengmian wanted to challenge him, it gave him the perfect opportunity to kill Chu Fengmian. Alright, since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Kid, make your move. Yi Zongxing stood with his hands behind his back and looked at Chu Fengmian with disdain. He was at the fourth step of the life and death steps, an unblemished expert. Even if Chu Fengmian defeated Yi Mu, he was still an ant in his eyes. Is that so? If I make my move, you won't have the slightest chance. Chu Fengmian sat on the War Dragon treasure carriage and looked at Yi Zongxing with disdain. Make your move. I'll give you a chance so that you won't die in peace. Damn it. Yi Zongxing didn't even finish his sentence. His face was already burning with rage. Given his status, he had always treated Chu Fengmian like an ant. But now, he was being looked down upon by an ant-like person, who even looked down on him. With his status, when had he ever been looked down upon like this? Yi Zongxing couldn't care less about his status. He suddenly made his move. A long blade was suddenly unsheathed from his hand. The blade was 10 times more terrifying than Yi Mu's blade. The sky was filled with tens of thousands of blades, turning the surroundings into a world of blades. Chu Fengmian was in the middle of these countless blades. All of them were aimed at Chu Fengmian. Yi Zongxing's move was swift and fierce. He didn't give Chu Fengmian any chance to escape. His anger was only because he wanted to kill Chu Fengmian as soon as possible. That was the only way to quell the anger in his heart. The sky was filled with blades. Under his control, all of them were aimed at Chu Fengmian. Yi Zongxing's move is too ruthless. The blade is unsheathed. This brat has no chance. Countless ancestors shook their heads when they saw Yi Zongxing's move. There was no turning back once the blade was unsheathed. Yi Zongxing's move was to not give Chu Fengmian any chance to escape. He wanted to kill Chu Fengmian. Sword break. Facing the countless blades, Chu Fengmian smiled. Chu Fengmian's lips curled upward. The ancestral dragon supreme sword was drawn out from its scabbard all of a sudden. A sharp edge was fired upward, aiming at the sabers. The moment the sword light slashed out, the countless swords turned into a long river. The countless blade edges were instantly parted by the river. Not a single one of the tens of thousands of blade edges could actually harm Chu Fengmian. What sword technique is this? This aura is the aura of the Sacred Hall. It's the sword technique of Saint Lord Beimang. This brat has really obtained the inheritance of Saint Lord Beimang. Sensing the sword intent contained in Chu Fengmian's blade, many of the patriarchs present shouted loudly. They were naturally familiar with the sword intent. It was Saint Lord Beimang's sword intent. What a monster! I thought the rumor was fake. I didn't expect it to be true. This brat has really obtained the inheritance of Saint Lord Beimang. No one in our Beimang Academy has ever obtained the inheritance of Saint Lord Beimang in the past 10,000 years. What kind of monster is this brat? His sword technique is so terrifying. Saint Lord Bei Mang's inheritance? Sword technique? Yi Zongxing's eyes flickered as a cruel look appeared on his face. Brat, it's no wonder you're so arrogant. You've actually comprehended Saint Lord Bei Mang's sword technique. Unfortunately, no matter how monstrous you are, the difference in cultivation realm isn't something you can make up for. Chapter 8:16. Yi Zongxing didn't expect Chu Fengmian to be able to block his blade. Yi Zongxing was the vice principal of the Northern Mang Academy, someone who had reached the unblemished realm. Yet, he couldn't defeat Chu Fengmian in one move. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Yi Zongxing's face revealed a hint of anger. With his status, being unable to defeat Chu Fengmian in one move was simply a disgrace. An ominous glint appeared in Yi Zongxing's eyes. Chu Fengmian's strength had indeed exceeded his expectations, but it was precisely because of this that his killing intent towards Chu Fengmian grew even stronger. A life-and-death realm martial artist with such terrifying strength was simply too monstrous. Such a monstrous genius. He must die. Yi Zongxing's eyes were filled with dread. If Chu Fengmian survived this time and stepped onto the life-and-death steps, he would be able to stand on equal footing with them. How terrifying would Chu Fengmian's strength be then? Yi Zongxing didn't doubt that with Chu Fengmian's qualifications, stepping onto the life-and-death steps wouldn't be a difficult matter. Blades descent. Countless blades suddenly revolved around Yi Zongxing's body. Waves of blade intent shrouded his body, making him look like a sharp blade. Kill! Yi Zongxing shouted coldly. The sword intent on his body instantly condensed, and a wave of killing intent immediately engulfed the surrounding area. The shroud of killing intent made Yi Zongxing seem like the incarnation of the god of death. He would kill anyone who stood in his way. He would kill anyone who stood in his way. Massacre's physique. Yi Zongxing is actually using the power of Massacre's physique. Many old ancestors were extremely shocked by Yi Zongxing's transformation. For many of them, this was the first time they had seen Yi Zongxing use his full strength. Only a few old ancestors with extremely high qualifications knew that this was Yi Zongxing's true strength. It was one of the innate godly physiques, Massacre's physique. Among the countless innate godly physiques, it was known as the Massacre's physique. It was said that when one reached the limit, they could turn into a killing god and kill everything in the world. Massacre's physique? I didn't expect you to be hiding such strength. Yi Zongxing had concealed his strength deeply. Even Chu Fengmian had only just realized that Yi Zongxing was actually a genius with an innate godly physique. To be able to become the vice principal of the Beimang Academy, there was no need to doubt Yi Zongxing's strength. So what if I have the Slaughter's physique? You're just an innate divine body ranked in the top 100. Even Yi Tianjun, who had the divine body of chaos ranked in the top 10, was killed by me. What can you, a massacre body, do? Chu Fengmian looked at Yi Zongxing and sneered. As he spoke, the sword in his hand moved again. The sword light entered the light and turned into 10 ancient battle dragons. They roared at the same time and swept towards Yi Zongxing. Dragon-like sword edge. Each primordial war dragon was formed by extremely powerful sword chi. Chu Fengmian's swordsmanship and the power of his bloodline had fused into one. The 10 primordial war dragons joined forces and swept towards Yi Zongxing. There was almost no flaw in their attack. Damn it! Die for me! Zhan Long! Hearing Chu Fengmian mention Yi Tianjun, Yi Zongxing's face became even more furious. His anger was written all over his face, making him go crazy. In the 10,000 years of the Yi clan's history, there had never been a genius like Yi Tianjun. The divine body of chaos ranked in the top 10 among the countless innate divine bodies in the entire 9 regions. However, such a genius had died in the hands of Chu Fengmian. This hatred was absolutely irreconcilable. Boom, boom, boom. With Yi Zongxing's anger, the murderous intent on his body became even more intense. His blade moved. This slash was filled with a layer of blood chi. It immediately slashed towards one of the primordial war dragons. With one slash, this primordial war dragon was immediately killed. The sword edge contained within could not compete with Yi Zongxing's blade. Go to hell, kid! Yi Zongxing did not intend to give Chu Fengmian any more chances after gaining the upper hand. His blade fell again and directly slashed towards Chu Fengmian. He wanted to kill Chu Fengmian completely. The remaining 9 primordial war dragons roared at the same time and charged forward. However, in the face of this blade, all of them were annihilated in an instant. Unblemished realm, massacre body. Yi Zongxing's strength was 10 times, no, 100 times stronger than Yi Mu and the others. War Dragon Carriage. Chu Fengmian sat down and the umbrella on the War Dragon carriage suddenly opened. 7-colored light blocked in front of Chu Fengmian and suddenly collided with the blade. Crack! A crisp sound was heard. The blade slashed the 7-colored light. Suddenly, the 7-colored light could not withstand the attack and was directly shattered. At the same time, Chu Fengmian's body was also resisting the blade. Seeing this scene, the corner of Yi Zongxing's mouth curled into a cold smile. He did not believe that Chu Fengmian could withstand his blade. In his heart, the next scene should be Chu Fengmian dying under the edge of his blade, the moment when he was completely annihilated. Crack! 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 However, when he looked over, the scene in front of him was completely different from what he had imagined. The blade slashed on Chu Fengmian's body and produced countless sparks. It looked as if it had slashed on an extremely sturdy spiritual weapon. At this moment, the blade could not cut Chu Fengmian's body in half. What a sturdy body! What kind of body is this? Can it withstand the blade? Countless patriarchs were so shocked that their eyes almost fell out of their sockets when they saw this scene. Even if they tried to block Yi Zongxing's blade, most of them would not be able to block it. They would most likely be killed in one strike. Even if they could withstand it, they would have to use countless means to do so. It was almost unimaginable to withstand it with one's flesh and blood. However, Chu Fengmian was actually withstanding Yi Zongxing's blade with his flesh and blood. Damn it! Yi Zongxing did not expect Chu Fengmian's body to be so sturdy. Although the Battle Dragon Treasure Chariot and the 9 ancient battle dragons had already reduced the blade's power to 1%, Yi Zongxing did not expect Chu Fengmian's body to be so sturdy. However, he still did not expect Chu Fengmian to be able to withstand it with his flesh and blood. There was no time for hesitation. Yi Zongxing once again gathered his spiritual power and slashed at Chu Fengmian with another blade. He was determined to kill Chu Fengmian. He wanted to kill Chu Fengmian completely. Not bad. Your strength is indeed beyond my imagination. Chu Fengmian looked at Yi Zongxing and sneered. You are qualified for me to use my full strength. Chapter 8:17. You are qualified for me to use my full strength. The progenitors were stunned upon hearing this. At this time, Chu Fengmian still had a trump card? Or rather, he hadn't used his full strength? A life-and-death martial artist was actually hiding his strength to deal with a flawless realm ancestor? Even Yi Zongxing's pupils rapidly shrunk when he heard these words. Clearly, he was incomparably fearful. However, Yi Zongxing quickly revealed a cold smile. No matter how many fortuitous encounters Chu Fengmian had and how monstrous he was still only at the 8th level of life and death realm. How could a life-and-death martial artist contend against him? Do you think you can still be so stubborn when death is at hand? Die. As Yi Zongxing spoke, his mind moved, and his blade became even faster and sharper. It was directly aimed at Chu Fengmian's chest. Supreme Sword Qi, come out! Facing the incoming blade, Chu Fengmian only spat out a few words indifferently. Streams of Sword Qi suddenly appeared beside him. The moment the Sword Qi appeared, Chu Fengmian's appearance became completely different from how it had been a moment ago. The sword intent Chu Fengmian had just displayed was incomparably sharp. Everyone who saw it couldn't help but want to retreat. But now, when the supreme sword Qi appeared, Chu Fengmian's sword intent was 10 times, 100 times more terrifying than before. This sword intent was simply unparalleled in the world. In the hearts of countless ancestors, they had never imagined that a person's sword intent could reach such a terrifying level. Especially when the owner of this sword intent was merely a disciple of their North Sea Academy, a life and death martial artist. Break! Chu Fengmian coldly shouted. The 400 supreme sword Qi suddenly merged into one, transforming into a sword array that suddenly pierced forward. Yi Zongxing's blade was shattered in an instant. In front of this supreme sword Qi, it seemed that no matter what kind of power it was, it would be directly destroyed. What is this thing? The moment Yi Zongxing saw the 400 supreme sword Qi, his eyes were also filled with deep fear. He could also see that Chu Fengmian's aura had undergone earth-shattering changes. Moreover, it wasn't just his aura. Chu Fengmian's strength had also skyrocketed by 12 times, or even 100 times. All these changes were due to the sudden appearance of the supreme sword Qi. Yi Zongxing could sense the terrifying sword intent contained within each of these supreme sword Qi. They were all at the pinnacle of sword intent. There were actually 400 of these supreme sword Qi. Yi Zongxing, do you really think you're my opponent? I'm just borrowing your hand to see what level my strength has reached. Now, you no longer have any meaning, so you can die. Chu Fengmian looked at Yi Zongxing coldly. If Chu Fengmian wanted to kill Yi Zongxing, he could have used his supreme sword energy right from the start and killed him completely. However, Chu Fengmian chose not to do so. Chu Fengmian also wanted to see what level his strength had reached, so he didn't use the supreme sword Qi. Now, it seemed that Chu Fengmian could defeat the first 3 steps of the life and death steps even without using his supreme sword Qi. But if he used his supreme sword Qi, Yi Zongxing wouldn't be his opponent. Whoosh! 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 As Chu Fengmian spoke, the 400 supreme sword Qi changed again, all of them merging into the sword in Chu Fengmian's hand, making his sword 100 times more terrifying than before. Boom! As the sword slashed through the air, the surrounding layers of space were completely destroyed. At the same time, the sword light had already locked onto Yi Zongxing's body. Even if Yi Zongxing wanted to escape, he couldn't. Slaughter heaven and earth! Yi Zongxing's face changed drastically when he saw the sword light coming. He could vaguely see how terrifying the sword light was. The current Chu Fengmian was no longer the same as before. The long saber in his hand moved once again. The murderous intent that filled the sky was all integrated into the edge of his saber. Another saber suddenly slashed out. This saber was his supreme killing move. Once it was unleashed, a sea of blood suddenly appeared in the sky. The power of this sea of blood crushed towards Chu Fengmian. The terrifying killing intent of this sea of blood wanted to crush Chu Fengmian completely. It's useless. Chu Fengmian only smiled coldly when he saw Yi Zongxing's action. His sword light pierced through like a rainbow. The sea of blood that filled the sky was directly split apart by the sword light. The sea of blood in the sky seemed to be endless and vast. But in front of the sword light, it couldn't withstand a single blow and was directly split apart. The sword was already piercing towards Yi Zongxing's chest. Save me! Ancestor, save me! Yi Zongxing suddenly shouted towards the depths of the northern Mang Palace in this moment of crisis. At this moment of life and death, Yi Zongxing no longer cared about his face as the vice principal. He didn't want to die in Chu Fengmian's hands. This scene made the surrounding ancestors suck in a breath of cold air. The vice principal of the Northern Mang Academy, Yi Zongxing, who possessed the massacre body, was forced to such a state by Chu Fengmian. He was even about to be killed. All of this was done by a life and death martial artist. Even in the history of the 9 regions, a peerless genius like Chu Fengmian had never appeared before. While everyone was discussing, an extremely ancient existence seemed to have heard Yi Zongxing's words from the depths of the northern Mang Palace. It suddenly woke up and sent a palm strike towards Yi Zongxing. The palm arrived in front of Yi Zongxing and blocked his path. Junior, Zongxing is the vice principal of the Northern Mang Academy. I can't let you kill him today. Stop. This voice came from the Northern Mang Palace. Although it was extremely old, the voice contained an unquestionable tone. Every word was like a supreme order. Who are you? The moment Chu Fengmian heard this voice, he naturally understood that the owner of this voice was definitely a true ancestor. Compared to Yi Zongxing's realm, this was an ancestor who was countless times more terrifying. He was a super old antique hidden in the Northern Mang Academy. Who I am is not important. This old man only appeared to tell you that there's always someone stronger. Although you have some strength, it's better for you to stop as soon as possible lest you provoke a disaster. The ancient voice came again, as if he didn't expect Chu Fengmian to dare to question his words. His words contained some anger. Let him go. Chapter 8:18. Chu Fengmian, this is the founder of our Northern Mang Academy, the ancestor of the Yi clan, Yi Huang. Vice Principal Deng Ling had been standing beside Chu Fengmian the whole time. She had witnessed Chu Fengmian defeating Yi Zongxing with her own eyes, and it felt like a dream. Now, she hurriedly reacted and transmitted her voice to Chu Fengmian. You must not provoke this person. He's the true upper echelon of our Northern Mang Academy. The founder was the first-generation expert who established the Northern Mang Academy. His strength is unfathomable. Founder. Hearing this title, Chu Fengmian's eyes couldn't help but reveal a hint of fear. In the Northern Mang Academy, it was a title that only a small number of ancestors knew. In the Northern Mang Academy, the true decision-makers were the founders. They had followed the Northern Mang sage back then, and each of them was an old antique who had lived for tens of thousands of years. Their strength was unfathomable. Although Chu Fengmian couldn't see the true strength of the Yi Huang, he knew that the Yi Huang's strength might have even reached the 7th step of the life and death step. Chu Fengmian didn't expect that such an old antique would be forced out by Chu Fengmian. It seemed like Yi Zongxing's status was extremely high to be able to awaken such an old antique. Chu Fengmian, let him go. A faint voice could be heard all of a sudden. The moment he heard this voice, Chu Fengmian's face calmed down slightly. The owner of this voice was the Xianbei Saint. The surrounding space suddenly shattered, and the Xianbei Saint's figure suddenly walked out from the endless spatial turbulence. Xianbei. Seeing the appearance of the Xianbei Saint, many ancestors' eyes were filled with fear. Even some of the old antiques in the Northern Mang Palace woke up. Countless gazes looked over at the same time. Xianbei, why did you barge into the Northern Mang Palace? The founder of the Yi clan, Yi Huang, suddenly spoke coldly. Without orders, no one is allowed to barge into the Northern Mang Palace. You didn't come to the Northern Mang Palace because you wanted to watch my disciple die in your hands? The Xianbei Saint appeared and stood beside Chu Fengmian. He looked coldly at the Yi Huang and spoke. You people from the Yi clan have gone too far. Xianbei, are you trying to protect your disciple? Your disciple has injured an ancestor. This is an unforgivable crime. Chu Fengmian, kneel down obediently and await the Academy's punishment. Only then will we be able to give you a lighter punishment for your sins. The Night Monarch suddenly said to Chu Fengmian. All of a sudden, waves of pressure enveloped Chu Fengmian's body, causing him to feel an incomparably huge pressure. He was only a step away from being suppressed by him. His was a step away from being suppressed, a step his spiritual energy was a step away from being suppressed was just was just a step away from being suppressed by swords the Yez dragon sword s Yi's sword. Unforgivable. It spoke. It and the S was. Dying is was. Dying right dying spoke of. It as. Chu Fengmian looked at the Yi Emperor and laughed. You're the one who's begging me. If you don't beg me, you'll have to wait to collect Yi Zongxing's corpse. Chu Fengmian spoke coldly. The killing intent in his words was self-evident. Even in front of the Yi Emperor, Chu Fengmian didn't feel any fear. Instead, he threatened him coldly. This time, they heard Chu Fengmian's words. None of the countless ancestors present dared to belittle Chu Fengmian's words. Chu Fengmian's character was crazy to the extreme. He was a man of his word. Although it was a threat, he was a man of his word. Many ancestors looked at Chu Fengmian as if he was a fiend. They didn't dare to provoke Chu Fengmian anymore. Right now, Chu Fengmian dared to directly threaten the founder of the Beimang Academy. This kind of character was simply lawless. Junior, you're courting death. The Yi Emperor shouted angrily when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. He was the founder of the Beimang Academy. Even these ancestors were juniors in front of him and had to be respectful. Every word he said was a supreme order, an order that absolutely could not be disobeyed. But now Chu Fengmian, who was just a disciple, dared to threaten him. How could he tolerate this? Suddenly, an incomparably huge palm print fell from the sky and blasted towards Chu Fengmian. The palm of this incomparably huge palm print was extremely dark. Once it shrouded over, there was no way to escape. Break! Chu Fengmian didn't make a move. Xianbei Saint, who was beside him, immediately made his move. He waved his hand and a wave of spiritual energy blasted out. When it collided with the palm print, the power of the palm print was instantly shattered. The two of them exchanged blows and their strength was actually on par. Tianming, Xianbei, you've already stepped into the heavenly fate realm? As the two moves clashed, the Yi Emperor's shocked voice came from the depths of the Beimang Palace. That's right, Yi Emperor. Today, your group of ancestors came to deal with my disciple, but my disciple easily dealt with it. How about this? Saint Xianbei said calmly. His words caused the progenitors to fall silent. Heavenly fate realm. Even Chu Fengmian didn't expect that his master, Saint Xianbei, had already stepped into the seventh step of the life and death steps, the heavenly fate realm. The last 3 steps of the life and death steps were the hardest to step into, but once one stepped into it, they would be at the end of the life and death step. Such people were all old antiques that had lived for thousands of years. Now that Saint Xianbei had reached the heavenly fate realm, his strength was enough to be on par with the founder of the Yi clan, the Yi Emperor. Saint Xuanbei's status had surpassed that of the old ancestors. He was someone who was on equal footing with the founders. Hence, none of the old ancestors dared to make a sound. Xianbei, are you really going to stubbornly save your disciple? He has violated the sect's rules and is unforgivable. The Yi Emperor was silent for a moment and said unwillingly, if you're really stubborn, then this old man will awaken the founders. At that time, even you will be suppressed. Chapter 8:19. The Beimang Academy had been around for thousands of years. Yi Huang was definitely not the only founder. However, founders like him usually chose to sleep and rarely appeared in the academy. Yi Huang had only woken up because of Yi Zongxing's call. Any force that wanted to develop had its own foundation. The founders of the Beimang Academy were naturally their foundation. The Xianbei Saint's current strength was indeed very powerful. The heavenly mandate realm. Even Yi Huang was not confident that he could suppress Chu Fengmian in front of the Xianbei Saint. However, if all the founders of the Beimang Academy were to wake up, Chu Fengmian would not be the only one who would be suppressed. Even the Xianbei Saint would be suppressed. Try me if you dare. The Xianbei Saint said disdainfully when he heard Yi Huang's words. Yi Huang's tone made Yi Huang so angry that he almost went crazy. He had threatened the Xianbei Saint because he did not want to have a real confrontation with the Xianbei Saint. After all, the founders would have to pay a huge price if they were to be disturbed. Generally speaking, the founders would only choose to wake up when the Beimang Academy was in a life and death situation. It was not worth it to pay such a huge price to deal with Chu Fengmian, the Xianbei saint, and the people of the Beimang Academy. Yi Huang's threat was only to scare the Xianbei saint. He wanted the Xianbei saint to take the initiative to retreat. As long as the Xianbei saint did not interfere, Chu Fengmian was nothing to them. It would be easy to deal with him. But now, his threat had no effect at all. Yi Huang, even if you kill me today, I can also kill all the Yi family patriarchs present. When that time comes, we'll see if the Yi family still has a foothold in the Beimang Academy. Chu Fengmian's tone was so eerie that it made people shudder. The Yi family patriarchs, in particular, felt their hair stand on end when they heard Chu Fengmian's words. They did not dare to question Chu Fengmian's words. Chu Fengmian had always been a man of his word, especially now that even Yi Zongxing had been defeated by him. Most of the Yi family patriarchs weren't even as strong as Yi Zongxing. If Chu Fengmian really went all out, it was very likely that he would be able to kill more than half of the Yi family patriarchs. At that time, even if the Yi clan won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. It would be unavoidable for them to fall in the future. Chu Fengmian, don't talk nonsense. The reason why the old ancestor didn't kill you was just to give you a chance to turn over a new leaf. You still don't know what's good for you. Quickly kneel down and admit your mistake. That's your only way out. When Yi Zongxing heard Chu Fengmian's words, he said unhappily. His defeat by Chu Fengmian had already caused him to lose all face. Now that Chu Fengmian had spoken, he was actually using their Yi clan's ancestor as a threat. How could he possibly tolerate this? A piece of trash like you dares to speak? Chu Fengmian coldly snorted. Suddenly, his figure moved. His figure was like an illusion. Suddenly, the entire Beimang Palace was filled with Chu Fengmian's illusion. Many of the patriarchs couldn't tell which one was the real Chu Fengmian. At the same time, Chu Fengmian's figure suddenly appeared in front of Yi Zongxing. Suddenly, his palm reached out and grabbed Yi Zongxing's head in Chu Fengmian's hand. As long as Chu Fengmian used a little more strength, Yi Zongxing would really die in Chu Fengmian's hands. His death couldn't be more miserable. Chu Fengmian, what are you doing? In that instant, Yi Huang couldn't even tell which illusion was the real Chu Fengmian. The phantom movement technique was illusory and could be considered as the #1 movement technique in the entire 9 regions. Now, Chu Fengmian had already cultivated the phantom movement technique to the great completion stage. Even Yi Huang couldn't see Chu Fengmian's figure clearly in that instant. By the time he reacted, Yi Zongxing's head was already in Chu Fengmian's hand. Even if he took action now, it would be too late. No matter how fast he was, he wouldn't be faster than Chu Fengmian. Originally, Yi Huang thought that Chu Fengmian's threat was somewhat laughable. But now, his face was completely frozen. He couldn't laugh anymore. The fact that Chu Fengmian had displayed such a movement technique meant that there was absolutely no falsehood in his words. As long as Chu Fengmian was willing, he could slaughter most of the Yi clan ancestors present. He could even slaughter all the Yi clan's disciples outside the Beimang Academy. Even if Yi Huang could take action and kill Chu Fengmian in the end, the Yi clan would be completely destroyed. Even if they killed Chu Fengmian, it would be useless. This point happened to hit Yi Huang's weak spot. The Yi clan was going against Chu Fengmian to avenge Yi Tianjun. But now, if they killed Chu Fengmian, they would have to pay with the lives of more than half of the Yi clan's disciples. Even Yi Huang wouldn't dare to take it. Chu Fengmian, let go of Zongxing. Zongxing is the vice principal of the Beimang Academy. How dare you grab his head? This is a capital offense. Do you know that? Another Yi clan's ancestor said loudly. Shut up. If you continue talking nonsense, I'll kill you next. Chu Fengmian said coldly when he heard the Yi clan's ancestor. His words were filled with a murderous aura, causing the countless ancestral patriarchs to tremble in fear. This was too crazy. This kind of action. The Yi clan had been in the Beimang Academy for 10,000 years. In these 10,000 years, no one had ever dared to provoke the Yi clan. Even if an ordinary expert had the strength to destroy the majority of the Yi clan's disciples, no one would dare to do so. This was because if they did so, they would definitely be hunted down by the Yi clan. Every expert who could reach this step cherished their lives very much. No one would do such a risky thing. But Chu Fengmian was different. Chu Fengmian had an extremely crazy character. In his previous life, he had already died once. He had already earned his life in this life. Moreover, in his previous life, even if he was weak, he would never be threatened by others. He would rather die than submit. In this life, with such strength, he wouldn't compromise. Since the Yi clan wanted to kill him, he would fight to the death. Chu Fengmian stood in the air. The killing intent on his body was clearly displayed. Chu Fengmian held Yi Zongxing's head in his hand. As Chu Fengmian exerted more force, it seemed like the head would be crushed in the next moment. Chapter 820. Yi Huang, didn't you want to kill me? Now that I'm here, let's see how you're going to kill me. Chu Fengmian grabbed Yi Zongxing's head with one hand as he looked at Yi Huang and laughed loudly. Yi clan's ancestor? The founder of Beimang Academy? Such an identity meant nothing to Chu Fengmian. Even the 7 major sects were nothing in Chu Fengmian's eyes, not to mention Yi Huang. Damn it! Damn it! Yi Huang's expression had already reached the peak of fury, and he was jumping with rage. Since when had he been mocked in such a manner? He had already unleashed all of his spiritual energy. He couldn't wait to attack Chu Fengmian. But he didn't dare to. Yi Zongxing was still in Chu Fengmian's hands, and Chu Fengmian was so confident. He didn't believe that Chu Fengmian didn't have any other trump cards. If he attacked now, it might mean the destruction of Yi clan. Kid, kill me if you can. I don't believe that you dare to kill me. If you kill me, you'll die too. Hurry up and let me go, or we'll both perish together. Yi Zongxing shouted crazily in Chu Fengmian's hands. He didn't believe that Chu Fengmian dared to kill him. If he killed him, Chu Fengmian wouldn't have any evidence against him. At that time, Yi Huang would definitely kill Chu Fengmian in anger. Don't dare to kill you? Chu Fengmian's eyes were filled with mockery. In the entire 9 regions, there was no one that Chu Fengmian didn't dare to kill. Suddenly, the battle dragon carriage under Chu Fengmian roared. With a thought from Chu Fengmian, waves of spiritual energy were injected into it. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian sat on the battle dragon carriage. The battle dragon treasure carriage suddenly began to gallop within the northern Mang Palace. Rumble! The entire Beimang Palace was shaken by this huge movement. Even the countless ancestors who were sleeping in the Beimang Palace were shaken. They were all awakened by this tremor. Is that so? Since you want to die, I'll grant you your wish. Chu Fengmian roared with laughter as he suddenly smacked Yi Zongxing's body to the ground. The battle dragon treasure carriage directly crushed Yi Zongxing's body. Bam, bam, bam. Yi Zongxing's body was crushed into a bloody mist by the battle dragon carriage's wheels. Chu Fengmian waved his hand and all the bloody mist was collected by Chu Fengmian. Only Yi Zongxing's head was left behind. Chu Fengmian picked it up and hung it on the carriage. Yi Zongxing's eyes were filled with disbelief. Yi Zongxing had never imagined that Chu Fengmian would actually dare to kill him. Many of the old masters were dumbfounded when they saw this. They could not believe what they were seeing. The old ancestors of the Yi clan were all enraged. They were furious to the extreme. Surges of murderous intent burst out from their bodies. Yi Zongxing was actually killed by Chu Fengmian. His body was crushed by the battle dragon treasure carriage. Even his head was hung on the battle dragon treasure carriage. This was an incomparably great humiliation. This humiliation was nailed into the hearts of the Yi clan's old masters. Yi Zongxing was the vice principal of the Northern Mang Academy. He represented the noble status of the Northern Mang Academy, but now he was killed by Chu Fengmian. The vice principal of the Northern Mang Academy had never been killed in thousands of years. This time, Chu Fengmian's actions had shaken the entire Northern Mang Palace. Madman! Madman! Vice Principal Deng Ling, who was standing beside Chu Fengmian, took a few steps back. Chu Fengmian was too crazy. Crazy and cruel. These words could not describe Chu Fengmian's actions. A vice principal of the Northern Mang Academy was killed by Chu Fengmian on the spot. Even if there were peerless geniuses in the Northern Mang Academy, no one would dare to do such a thing. Beating an old master and killing a vice principal. If any of these things were to spread to the 9 domains, it would be a big event that would shake the 9 domains. Most of the old masters present had already made the decision to not provoke Chu Fengmian anymore. This madman even dared to kill the vice principal of the Northern Mang Academy. What else wouldn't he dare to do? Fortunately, although Chu Fengmian was crazy, he didn't kill the innocent. Those he killed were his enemies. Therefore, as long as these old masters didn't provoke Chu Fengmian, they wouldn't cause any trouble. Right now, they were sitting on top of the mountain and watching the tigers fight. They weren't willing to make a move. Only the old masters of the Yi clan were furious. Chu Fengmian killing Yi Zongxing was a slap to the Yi clan's face. The Yi clan could be said to be able to cover the sky with one hand in the Northern Mang Academy. It was an extremely huge clan in the 9 domains. Since when had they been forced to such a step? They were even forced to such a step by a mere life and death realm martial artist. What's going on? What happened? The old antiques suddenly showed up one after another. The auras of these old masters were extremely ancient, with some traces of chaos. They seemed to have just woken up from a deep slumber in the depths of the Northern Mang Palace. 3 founders. Chu Fengmian glanced over and felt that the auras of these 3 old masters weren't far from the Yi Huangs. They were all at the 7th step of the life and death steps, the heavenly fate realm. The status of these 3 people was obviously the same as the Yi Huang. They were all founders of the Northern Mang Academy. They had been in a deep slumber all this time, and were all awakened by Chu Fengmian's actions. As soon as they came out, they saw the scene of Yi Zongxing being crushed by the War Dragon carriage. Wind Emperor, Martial Emperor, Sun Emperor, Vice Principal Deng Ling hastily greeted the 3 founders when he saw them appear. What's going on? Yi Huang, you've also woken up? What happened that caused such a commotion in the Northern Mang Palace? One of the 3 founders, a warrior with an extremely tall body, suddenly spoke. His body contained an extremely frightening martial way. This martial way was more frightening than any martial way that Chu Fengmian had ever seen. This person was one of the founders of the Northern Mang Academy, known as the Martial Emperor. In the Northern Mang Academy, this person's martial Tao was the most profound. Wind Emperor, Martial Emperor, Sun Emperor, since the 3 of you have awakened, this brat deceived his master and killed the vice principal. He's simply a lawless devil. Since you've awakened, then come with me and kill this person. Chapter 8:21. When the Night Emperor saw that the 3 founders had awakened as well, he shouted out loudly. The Night Emperor hated Chu Fengmian to the core. He wanted nothing more than to kill Chu Fengmian right there, and then to vent the hatred in his heart. Not only Yi Tianjun, but even Yi Zongxing had died in Chu Fengmian's hands. How could he bear it? Founding ancestors, please accept my offer. This kid is a ferocious devil. He killed the vice principal and attacked the founders. This is outrageous. I beseech the 3 patriarchs to kill this brat. The old ancestor of the Yi clan, Yi Mu, hurriedly shouted. Yi Mu, do you want to die? Chu Fengmian glanced at Yi Mu after hearing his words. He had spared Yi Mu's life, but Yi Mu still dared to go against him. Boom! Chu Fengmian's war dragon chariot suddenly started moving, rushing towards Patriarch Yi Mu in an instant. The war dragon chariot sped through the sky, turning into a beam of light and crashing into Yi Mu's ancestor. Stop! When the 3 founders saw that Chu Fengmian still dared to attack Yi Mu, their expressions changed abruptly, and they shouted one after another. The Martial Emperor suddenly attacked. A gigantic palm enveloped Chu Fengmian and the battle dragon treasured carriage. He wanted to subdue Chu Fengmian. Stop? No one can save the people that I, Chu Fengmian, want to kill. Supreme Sword Qi, break for me. Facing the attack of the martial emperor, Chu Fengmian's tone remained cold. All of a sudden, 400 streams of sword qi appeared around him and turned into a single stream of sword qi, which shot forward. The martial emperor's gigantic palm was directly cut open by the supreme sword qi and shattered on the spot. What? The martial king hadn't expected that the supreme sword qi would actually contain such a sharp power. His palm was mercilessly sliced apart by the supreme sword qi. Although this was only a palm formed by his spiritual energy, it still represented the power of the seventh step of the life and death steps, the heavenly fate realm. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that not only would he fail to capture Chu Fengmian, he would instead be defeated so easily by Chu Fengmian. Almost at the same time, Chu Fengmian's battle dragon treasure chariot charged towards Yimu. No one dared to stop the battle dragon treasure chariot. Junior, stop right now. The Wind Emperor and the Sun Emperor, the two founders, also shouted loudly. At the same time, he suddenly attacked. Another two waves of spiritual power shrouded Chu Fengmian at the same time. He still wanted to stop Chu Fengmian and completely suppress him. No one can stop me. All of you break. Chu Fengmian shouted coldly. Suddenly, a drop of blood essence flew out from his fingertip and landed on the war dragon treasure carriage. The aura of the 8 ancient war dragons on the war dragon treasure carriage started to rise crazily. Dragon roars resounded. 8 runes that represented the ancient war dragons appeared on the umbrella on the war dragon treasure carriage. Suddenly, it opened and turned into a rainbow-colored radiance. Within the radiance there were dragon roars. The rainbow-colored radiance collided with the Wind Emperor and the Sun Emperor's forces in the air. The War Dragon treasure carriage was a top-grade heaven-grade spiritual tool. Now that Chu Fengmian had integrated his blood essence into it, its power was even stronger than when it was in the 9 Demon City. The rainbow-colored radiance was the toughest defense between heaven and earth. The two forces bombarded the War Dragon treasure chariot, but they were unable to break through the defense of the rainbow-colored radiance. Innate Luo Umbrella. Such a treasure carriage. This is the 9 Demon City's Heavenly Demon Treasure Carriage? How did the Heavenly Demon Treasure Carriage fall into his hands? The Wind Emperor saw this scene and was secretly shocked. He suddenly realized that the treasure carriage that Chu Fengmian was sitting on was the treasure of the 9 Demon City, the War Dragon treasure carriage. The War Dragon treasure carriage's defense was known as the Absolute Barrier. It could never be broken in a battle between cultivators of the same level. Chu Fengmian's current strength was enough to reach the 4th and 5th steps of the life and death step. With his strength, he could activate the umbrella on the War Dragon treasure carriage and turn it into a barrier made of rainbow-colored radiance. Even the two founders of the Heaven's Mandate realm couldn't break it in a short time. At the same time, the War Dragon treasure carriage had already set off, locking onto the Night Herder forefather's figure. The Night Herder forefather continuously retreated and even wanted to escape. However, his speed was as slow as a snail in front of the War Dragon treasure carriage. His body was instantly torn apart by the wheels. Rumble! The Night Herder forefather's body was torn apart. Even the bloody mist around his body was devoured by Chu Fengmian. Another head hung on the War Dragon treasure carriage. This was another Baiming forefather, killed by Chu Fengmian just like that. In addition to Yi Zongxing, who also died under the War Dragon treasure carriage's wheels, 2 Yi forefathers had died in Chu Fengmian's hands in a short period of time. In the history of the Baiming Academy, such a thing had never happened before. 2 forefathers were killed by a single student. Even in the war between the Western region and the Earth Demon sect, these forefathers wouldn't die so easily. The Yi clan had been the overlord of the Baiming Academy for 10,000 years and had only nurtured a total of 20 forefathers. Now, 2 of them were killed by Chu Fengmian. Such a loss was something that the Yi clan had never experienced before. Who else dares to speak? Step out. Chu Fengmian's gaze swept across the crowd. Now, not even the Yi clan's patriarchs dared to speak. Chu Fengmian was able to kill the night herder forefather in front of the 4 founders. It wasn't that the founders didn't make a move. They did, but Chu Fengmian blocked their attacks. A life and death realm martial artist could even block the attack of a Heaven's Mandate founder. This was beyond their understanding. In the entire history of the 9 regions, such a thing had never happened before. Little bastard! Yi Huang looked at Chu Fengmian and was about to go crazy. He no longer had any scruples. Chu Fengmian continuously killed the Yi clan's forefathers in front of him. This was an insult to him. Let's attack together and suppress this kid. A puny disciple dares to go against the higher-ups of our academy and kill our forefathers. Even if he's a monstrous genius, we can't let him go. We must teach him a lesson. The Martial Emperor, the Wind Emperor, and the Sun Emperor all looked at Chu Fengmian and said coldly. Chapter 8:22. Now, Chu Fengmian had killed Yi Mu in front of the 3 founders. Even with their esteemed status, Chu Fengmian did not place them in his eyes in the slightest. This caused the 3 founders to burn with rage. They were extremely furious. If you want to suppress my disciple, you'll have to get through me first, Xianbei Saint said coldly. He suddenly moved and stood in front of Chu Fengmian, blocking his path. Xianbei Saint was surprised by Chu Fengmian's disciple. He had only met Chu Fengmian by chance in the remote victorious martial country and accepted him as a disciple. He didn't expect Chu Fengmian to have such a day, especially now that he could kill an old ancestor in the life and death realm. No matter what, he wouldn't let Chu Fengmian be suppressed like this. Moreover, today's matter was caused by the Yi clan. Xianbei, are you really going to protect this kid? You have reached the Heaven's Mandate realm and are qualified to join the ranks of our founders. You must know when to stop and when to stop. The Martial Emperor looked at Saint Xianbei. He was extremely domineering, and his tone contained an unquestionable command. No matter what happened today, your disciple has committed a sin by killing the ancestor. Even if there's a reason for it, he must be punished. You, Xianbei, are also a member of the North Sea Academy. You should know the Academy's rules. That's right, Xianbei. You must give us an explanation for today's matter. If you don't hand over your disciple today, don't blame us for awakening the other founders and holding an ancient trial. The Wind Emperor and the Sun Emperor also attacked at the same time. Every single one of his words contained a kind of coercion. Under the pressure of the 3 founders, none of the old ancestors dared to speak. Leave quickly. I'll deal with this. With your strength, if you want to leave, they won't be able to stop you with my help. Xianbei Saint secretly transmitted his voice to Chu Fengmian. If it was just Yi Huang alone, he would be able to protect Chu Fengmian. However, he had the help of Martial Emperor, Wind Emperor, and Yang Emperor. Even if he wanted to protect Chu Fengmian, he couldn't do anything. He could only secretly transmit his voice to Chu Fengmian to leave. Xianbei Saint's words warmed Chu Fengmian's heart. Although he and Xianbei Saint were master and disciple in name, they didn't have much contact. However, today, Xianbei Saint had indeed recognized Chu Fengmian as his disciple. For the sake of Chu Fengmian, he did not hesitate to become enemies with the 4 founders. Even with his status, this was still a great deal of pressure. It's all right, master. Leave today's matter to me. Chu Fengmian's eyes' words. And the 4 founders, twos ants twos today's. It seems that you guys really want to fight to the death with me today. Good, it seems that I, Chu Fengmian, am too kind. Today, I'll let you 4 old guys see whether you can stop me or not. And you, Yi Huang, I'll let you see with your own eyes how I'll completely destroy your Yi family. Chu Fengmian said coldly. The aura on his body had already condensed to the extreme. Sharp sword intent was fully displayed from Chu Fengmian's body. When Chu Fengmian attacked just now, he had used the power of the battle dragon art, supreme sword chi, and the power of the battle dragon treasure chariot. Now, the moment his sword will was revealed, it represented Chu Fengmian's real terrifying power. Layers of sword will surrounded Chu Fengmian's body. Countless mysterious sword wills were hidden around Chu Fengmian's body. Some of the weaker patriarchs couldn't see through the hidden door. However, the experts among the patriarchs were shocked when they saw Chu Fengmian's transformation. Even some patriarchs who had transcended life and death couldn't see through the mystery of the sword intent. Not only could they not comprehend it, but they couldn't even see it. Chu Fengmian's sword intent had exceeded the imagination of countless patriarchs. Sword, come. Chu Fengmian waved his hand and the ancestral dragon paragon sword suddenly appeared in his hand. The moment the sword was drawn, the entire northern Mang palace exploded. Along with the sound of the explosion, a terrifying sword light that was at least 10,000 feet long suddenly shot out. The power of 400 supreme sword chi was contained in this sword light. The space of the northern Mang palace was about to be torn apart by this sword light. For a moment, the sky and earth were spinning. This sword light directly swept towards the patriarchs of the Yi family. It instantly slashed towards the direction of the patriarchs of the Yi family. More than 20 patriarchs of the Yi family in the northern Mang palace were all enveloped by this sword light. The bodies of some of the weaker patriarchs of the Yi family were shattered the moment they came into contact with the sword light. They couldn't resist at all. All of the essence blood was devoured by the sword light and integrated into Chu Fengmian's body. In Chu Fengmian's body, the essence blood was refined by the battle dragon art. The power of the battle dragon art was fully unleashed. All of the essence blood was turned into the purest energy of Chu Fengmian. As his sword light swept out, Chu Fengmian's aura rose steadily. None of the patriarchs of the Yi family who were swept into the sword light could escape. This was Chu Fengmian's full strength now. He had obtained countless fortuitous encounters in the sinkhole sky. This was the first time he had used his full strength after mastering the Nine Realms sword art. His current strength was many times more terrifying than when he had been in the sinkhole sky. The sword slashed out with unstoppable force. No cultivator dared to resist such a terrifying sword. Damn it! Yi Huang didn't expect Chu Fengmian to suddenly go berserk and kill the patriarchs of the Yi family. By the time he reacted, 5 to 6 patriarchs of the Yi family had already died under Chu Fengmian's sword light. These patriarchs of the Yi family were enveloped by the sword light. None of them could escape. Not even a trace of flesh was left. All of them were crushed, leaving only the purest spiritual energy, which was all devoured by Chu Fengmian. Even though these patriarchs were beyond life and death, and had extremely terrifying vitality, they were all annihilated in an instant. There was no doubt that they would die. Endless starry night, darkness of heaven and earth. As the Night Emperor roared, he spat out a mouthful of essence blood. This mouthful of essence blood started to burn up in the air. In his fury, the Night Emperor was willing to pay any price to kill Chu Fengmian by consuming his own blood essence. Chapter 8:23. The moment the Night Emperor struck, he even burned his blood essence and punched out. The entire northern Mang palace was plunged into darkness. Under these layers of darkness, no one could escape from the shroud of darkness. The layers of darkness turned into layers of cages, trapping Chu Fengmian's body within. At the same time, an unparalleled pressure descended. It wanted to completely suppress Chu Fengmian in the darkness. Once Chu Fengmian was suppressed in the darkness, there was no way he could escape. Eternal night darkness. Yi Huang's body had also merged into the darkness. Right now, he seemed to have become the master of this darkness. Chu Fengmian was just a lamb waiting to be slaughtered in front of him. This is the supreme secret technique of the Yi family, eternal night darkness. Once it's activated, it's enough to devour everything around it. He will become the ruler of the darkness, and no one can escape from it. Xianbei Saint shouted from the side. He did not have time to attack. The three founders, Wu Huang, Yang Huang and Feng Huang, had already arrived in front of him, stopping him from attacking. Eternal night darkness? No one can escape from it? Is that so? Chu Fengmian's lips curled into a cold smile. He suddenly pulled out his sword. He was not afraid of the eternal night darkness. The tip of Chu Fengmian's sword moved, and a sword light suddenly slashed out. The moment the sword light was released, a gap was created in the layers of darkness around Chu Fengmian. Mysterious black sword formation. Out. The moment the gap was created, Chu Fengmian roared. 100,000 spiritual swords appeared from his body at the same time. The moment the 100,000 spiritual swords were unsheathed from the mysterious black sword formation, countless terrifying sword lights were displayed. The sword lights dispersed the surrounding darkness. At the same time, Chu Fengmian waved his hand, and Yi Huang's body was pulled out from the darkness. Yi Huang, you want to deal with me with such a weak technique? Ridiculous. Mysterious black sword formation, trap him. With a thought from Chu Fengmian, the black mysterious sword array surrounded the Night Emperor. Immediately, the Night Emperor was trapped within the black mysterious sword array. 100,000 spiritual swords formed layers of seals. Even the Night Emperor was unable to break free. With the ancestral Dragon Supreme sword in his hand, the Yi clan's old ancestors didn't manage to escape in time. They were all sucked into the sword and their bodies were shattered. Their essence and blood fell into Chu Fengmian's body and were devoured by him. Bang! 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 In the blink of an eye, more than 10 Yi family old ancestors were sucked into the sword light. Each of them struggled madly, but to no avail. One by one, their bodies were torn apart and essence blood splattered everywhere. Good! Devour! Chu Fengmian was overjoyed when he saw the essence blood filling the sky. As long as he had enough spiritual energy, his battle dragon art would be able to increase his strength by another step. After leaving the returning ruined sky, Chu Fengmian didn't have many opportunities to kill experts. After all, it wasn't easy to kill someone who had surpassed the life and death realm in the 9 regions. Now that the Yi clan's old ancestors were gathered in Beimang Palace, it was the best opportunity for Chu Fengmian. Of course, Chu Fengmian wouldn't let it go. He wanted to kill the Yi clan's old ancestors and turn their essence blood into Chu Fengmian's own strength. Chu Fengmian opened his mouth and devoured the essence blood of the Yi clan's old ancestors. More than 20 Yi clan's old ancestors had died in Chu Fengmian's hands. The Yi clan is finished. Some of the old ancestors muttered to themselves when they saw this scene. The Yi clan's old ancestors were all killed by Chu Fengmian. Even if Chu Fengmian died today, the Yi clan would be completely finished. Moreover, who would have thought that the Yi clan's people wanted to deal with Chu Fengmian? Now they were asking for trouble. Damn it! Damn it! What kind of sword formation is this? Why does this kid have so many treasures on him? The Night Emperor was trapped in the black mysterious sword formation and could only watch helplessly as Chu Fengmian massacred the patriarchs of the Yi clan. However, he was unable to extricate himself. Although the spiritual energy contained within each of the 100,000 spiritual swords of the black mysterious sword formation was nothing to the Night Emperor, the spiritual energy contained within each sword was nothing. However, every time Yi Huang wanted to break out, the power of the 100,000 spiritual swords would fuse together. These 100,000 spiritual swords were all Earth-grade spiritual weapons. The combined power wasn't any weaker than the Ancestral Dragon's Supreme Sword or the Battle Dragon Treasure Chariot. The Ancestral Dragon's Supreme Sword, the Battle Dragon Treasure Chariot, and the mysterious Black Sword formation. As long as these 3 treasures were taken out, countless experts in the 9 regions would fight for them. Even the experts from the 7 major sects would come to fight for them. Any genius who obtained one of these treasures would be able to look down on the 9 regions and become an expert of their generation. But now these 3 treasures were all in Chu Fengmian's hands. This was simply shocking. The treasures of the founders were nothing in front of Chu Fengmian. The mysterious black sword formation had always been cultivated by Chu Fengmian and was rarely used. This didn't mean that the mysterious black sword formation was weak. On the contrary, the current power of the mysterious black sword formation was even more terrifying than the ancestral dragon's supreme sword and the battle dragon treasure chariot. This was because the power of the black mysterious sword array did not require Chu Fengmian to control it. Even if it was given to any warrior, they would have the ability to fight against the founders. Using it to entangle the opponents, Chu Fengmian could slaughter the Yi family patriarch wantonly. Slaughtering my people, causing havoc in the North Sea Academy, little bastard. Don't think that you can escape unscathed today. You have killed countless Yi clan's old ancestors. My Yi clan has declined today, but you will stay here forever. The Yi Huang's face was burning with anger. If looks could kill, Chu Fengmian would have died 1,000 times over under the Yi Huang's gaze. Following the Yi Huang's roar, the spiritual energy in his body was condensed to the extreme. Suddenly, he blasted out with his palm. The layers of spiritual swords on the mysterious black sword formation were instantly dispersed. No matter how strong the mysterious black sword formation was, it could only trap an expert like the Yi Huang for a few breaths of time. At the same time, an incomparably huge palm had already enveloped Chu Fengmian. This palm was blood-red in color. North Sea Heavenly Palace. The Yi Huang roared as he attacked. The entire North Sea Heavenly Palace was like a living creature that had suddenly awakened. Waves of pressure suddenly fell from the sky and enveloped Chu Fengmian. Chapter 824. As the Night Emperor made his move, a terrifying pressure suddenly surged out from the northern Mang Palace. This sudden change caused even the countless old ancestors in the northern Mang Palace to be extremely shocked. It was as if no one had expected this. The northern Mang Palace had existed since the establishment of the Northern Mang Academy. It had always been the sacred ground of the Northern Mang Academy. However, few people knew that the Northern Mang Palace itself was an extremely frightening spiritual artifact. Only the founders had the qualifications to know about this matter and use the power of the Northern Mang Palace. This power. Feeling the change in the Northern Mang Palace, Chu Fengmian's gaze slightly changed. There was some astonishment and some nostalgia. This nostalgia flashed by in an instant. The Night Emperor only saw the astonishment in Chu Fengmian's eyes. Chu Fengmian, do you really think that my Northern Mang Academy doesn't have any foundation? No one has ever dared to cause trouble in the Northern Mang Palace. The Night Emperor looked at Chu Fengmian and spoke while controlling the power of the Northern Mang Palace with his mind. Being in the Northern Mang Palace, under the pressure of the Northern Mang Palace, even the founders had to bear a great pressure. If this pressure enveloped Chu Fengmian, he wouldn't even have the strength to retaliate. There's actually such a method hidden in the Northern Mang Palace. The Night Emperor didn't hesitate to use such a foundation. It seems like Chu Fengmian has forced him to the extreme. A life and death expert can actually force the Northern Mang Academy to such an extent. The surrounding ancestors sighed with emotion. Feeling the aura of the Northern Mang Palace, many of them already understood in their hearts. Chu Fengmian was bound to lose this battle. No. It should be said that in their hearts, they had never imagined that Chu Fengmian would be able to reach such a stage. Chu Fengmian had forced the Night Emperor to such an extent and killed countless ancestors of the Yi family. Everything he had done was already enough to shock the world. However, it was a pity that no matter how monstrous and heaven-defying Chu Fengmian was, no one felt that Chu Fengmian had any chance in this situation. Run! The Xianbei saint hurriedly turned around and shouted at Chu Fengmian. In Northern Mang Palace, the pressure of Northern Mang Palace was almost invincible. Even powerful martial artists would find it extremely difficult to resist this pressure, let alone Chu Fengmian, who was only in life and death realm. How could he resist it? Chu Fengmian, your strength is indeed monstrous. You can't even find someone as monstrous as you in the entire 9 domains. Yi Huang looked at Chu Fengmian and said word by word. However, today is the day you die. Leave all your fortunate encounters behind. I will first suppress you, then slowly torture you. As his voice rang out, the Yi Huang suddenly moved. Within his palm, an extremely large seal was condensed, fusing together with the power of the northern Mang Palace. At the same time, it enveloped Chu Fengmian. This incomparably huge pressure had already turned into a 7-story pagoda. Being locked down by this 7-story pagoda, no one could even escape from it. Under this move, even Heavenly Fate Realm martial artists would only end up being suppressed. Sword Sovereign Palace, I didn't expect you to still exist after 10,000 years. It seems like Senior Brother still took you away back then. Facing this pressure, Chu Fengmian's expression was calm, but he suddenly muttered to himself. His voice was so soft that no one could hear it. However, in Northern Mang Palace, a thought seemed to have heard Chu Fengmian's voice. Rumble! Just at this instant, a golden spiritual sword suddenly flew out from the depths of the Northern Mang Palace. At the instant the golden spiritual sword flew out, the pressure that enveloped Chu Fengmian's body suddenly disappeared. The 7-story pagoda also instantly exploded. The entire Northern Mang Palace was completely engulfed by a wave of sharp sword intent. Northern Mang Palace's artifact spirit? Why would the artifact spirit of Northern Mang Palace suddenly appear? Yi Huang, Wind Emperor, Sun Emperor, and the others were all stunned when they saw the golden spiritual sword appear. Others might not know, but they clearly knew that the golden spiritual sword was the artifact spirit of Northern Mang Palace. All along, the artifact spirit of Northern Mang Palace had been hidden in the depths of Northern Mang Palace and had never appeared. But now it actually appeared. Young Lord? It's you? The golden spiritual sword arrived before Chu Fengmian and suddenly stopped. In Chu Fengmian's mind, an extremely childish voice resounded. Yunjian, it's really you. When Chu Fengmian heard the childish voice, his face revealed some joy. He didn't expect to meet an old friend after 10,000 years. The Sword Sovereign Palace was the palace of the Master of Sword Dao. Back then, when Chu Fengmian comprehended sword techniques, he had an extremely good relationship with the artifact spirit. 10,000 years had passed, but the Sword Sovereign Palace had actually been preserved and wasn't discovered by the 7 major sections. It had always been hidden in Northern Mang Palace. What happened? Why would the artifact spirit of Northern Mang Palace appear? Furthermore, we seem to be unable to control the power of Northern Mang Palace. Not good. This kid has obtained the inheritance of Northern Mang Sage. It's very likely that the artifact spirit of Northern Mang Palace has noticed this. The Night Emperor, Yang Emperor, Wind Emperor, and Martial Emperor's faces instantly turned ugly. No, we must take advantage of this opportunity to kill this kid first, lest something unexpected happens. The Night Emperor let out a long roar and no longer hesitated. He no longer wanted to suppress Chu Fengmian and directly attacked to kill Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian's body contained countless opportunities. Originally, they wanted to suppress Chu Fengmian and force him to tell them all about his various fortuitous encounters. But now, the unforeseen event made them unable to do so. The 4 founders attacked at almost the same time. Martial skills that filled the sky were all unleashed at the same time. A heavenly mandate realm martial artist was an extremely terrifying figure in the northern region. Now that the 4 of them attacked together, it was earth-shattering and simply impossible for anyone to resist. However, the moment the 4 of them enveloped Chu Fengmian's body, before Chu Fengmian could attack, a childish and furious voice suddenly rang out. You're courting death. All of a sudden, a terrifying sword aura shot out from the golden spiritual sword beside Chu Fengmian. The power of the entire Northern Mang Palace was mobilized and integrated into the sword aura. Suddenly, the sword swept out. Rumble! The sword ray swept across and exploded in the air. The countless martial skills and spiritual energy were all shattered by the sword ray. Layer by layer, everything was crushed. Chapter 825. The moment the golden spiritual sword was unleashed, his strength even surpassed the combined strength of the four founders. The sword swept across, looking down on everyone. No one could contend against it. Yi Huang, Yang Huang, Wind Huang, and Wu Huang were all forced back by the swordlight. The rebounding force caused their chests to tremble violently as they spat out large mouthfuls of blood essence. The entire Beimang Palace was now filled with the sound of the sword. Even the old ancestors who were not affected felt the world spinning around them. Their faces were filled with extreme fear. Such power was enough to completely annihilate them if they were to be slightly affected. The Sword Sovereign Palace was the palace of the Sword Dao Master. The Sword Dao Master's sword intent had flowed into it over time. Moreover, Chu Fengmian, as well as countless of his senior brothers and senior sisters, had comprehended their sword techniques from the Sword Sovereign Palace. The Sword Sovereign Palace had seen the comprehension of this sword technique. Although he was an artifact spirit, he was also an expert of the Sword Dao. In the current world, there were very few Sword Dao experts who could contend against him. The moment he made his move, he displayed his powerful strength. Even Yi Huang and the rest had extremely shocked expressions on their faces. They had never imagined that the Northern Mang Palace, which they were familiar with, would actually possess such frightening strength. Moreover, the Beimang Palace had actually made a move to stop them from killing Chu Fengmian. That sword strike from before was only a little bit away from completely destroying them. After encountering such a calamity, they were already considered extremely lucky to be seriously injured. Cloud Sword. Chu Fengmian could not help calling out softly when he saw the Sword Sovereign Palace making a move. For him, this was the first time he saw the Sword Sovereign Palace making a move. 10,000 years ago, when the Sword Dao Master was besieged, Chu Fengmian was brought along by his third senior sister to escape. He knew nothing about what happened to the Sword Sovereign Palace. Therefore, he did not remember that the Sword Sovereign Palace was brought to the Beimang Academy by his eldest senior brother. Young Master. In Chu Fengmian's mind, the Sword Sovereign Palace's tender voice sounded again. However, this time, his voice sounded a little weak. My spiritual energy is not enough to kill these four people. No matter how powerful the Sword Emperor Palace was, it was only an artifact spirit. Just like Elder Yun in the Cloud Feather Palace, it had its limitations. Elder Yun could only move within the Cloud Feather Palace and was unable to leave. Although the Sword Emperor Palace was extremely powerful, it did not have enough spiritual energy to support the weapon spirit's movement. Don't worry, I'll give you some spirit stones to help you recover your spiritual energy, Chu Fengmian said after hearing the words of the Sword Sovereign Palace. He waved his hand and opened his spatial ring. Piles of spiritual stones flew out. They were all royal-grade spirit stones. They were as tall as a mountain, and there were tens of millions of them. All of them flew out like a mountain. This is royal-grade spirit stone. Young Master, where did you get so many royal-grade spirit stones? Even the Sword Sovereign Palace was startled when he saw Chu Fengmian's wealth. Even 10,000 years ago, accumulating such a frightening amount of wealth was an extremely difficult matter. He could also see through Chu Fengmian's realm, which was merely in the life and death realm. Therefore, Sword Emperor Palace didn't expect Chu Fengmian to possess such wealth. Good. Good. In this damned place, I can only absorb spiritual energy from the void. I only managed to accumulate a little bit after 10,000 years. Now that I have Young Master's spirit stones, I can recover 20 to 30% of my strength. After the Sword Sovereign Palace recovered from his shock, he was overjoyed. He began to mobilize his energy and devour all the spirit stones. Chu Fengmian was currently in the Beimang Palace, which was also the Sword Sovereign Palace. The spirit stones he threw out were instantly devoured. Immediately, the power of the Sword Sovereign Palace began to crazily rise. Compared to before, the power of the Sword Emperor Palace had started to change completely. The runes and engravings on the surface of the palace had started to appear, and a sharp sword intent had also burst out. When Chu Fengmian first entered, he did not feel that the Beimang Palace was the Sword Sovereign Palace. This was because the power of the Sword Sovereign Palace was too weak at that time. He could not feel the slightest bit of sword intent. Therefore, even Chu Fengmian did not recognize it immediately. He had to wait until the Night Emperor activated the power of the Sword Sovereign Palace before he recognized it. As the palace of the former Lord of Sword Dao, the power of the Sword Sovereign Palace was clearly far beyond this. Young master, this is great. 10,000 years, I never thought that I would be able to see you again after 10,000 years. While the Sword Sovereign Palace was devouring the spirit stones, his joyful voice resounded in Chu Fengmian's mind. For him, this was the first time in 10,000 years that he saw an old friend. The countless disciples of the former Lord of Sword Dao had all fallen. Not long after the establishment of the Beimang Academy, his eldest senior brother had also fallen. Now that the Sword Sovereign Palace had met Chu Fengmian, it was incomparably excited. At the same time, the golden spiritual sword flew towards Chu Fengmian and pierced into his chest. Chu Fengmian saw all this and did not stop it. The golden spiritual sword did not leave any injuries after piercing into Chu Fengmian's chest. Instead, it directly fused into Chu Fengmian's body. Master recognition. Ever since the Lord of Sword Dao died 10,000 years ago, the Sword Sovereign Palace no longer had a master. This time, it recognized a new master. Pung, pung, pung. All of a sudden, Chu Fengmian's spiritual energy fluctuations were completely revealed. His body was constantly transforming, and the power of his body seemed to be crazily rising in an instant. Ninth layer of life and death realm. The recognition of the Sword Sovereign Palace made Chu Fengmian's realm breakthrough, directly stepping into the ninth layer of life and death realm. The Sword Emperor Palace was a spiritual weapon created by the Master of Sword Principle. Chu Fengmian and the Master of Sword Principle were of the same origin. It was self-evident that Chu Fengmian would benefit from the Sword Emperor Palace. Refreshing. Refreshing. Chu Fengmian laughed loudly. It had been a long time since Chu Fengmian had felt so refreshed. Encountering the Sword Sovereign Palace again was definitely the first time he felt so refreshed. What made Chu Fengmian even more delighted was that his realm had begun to rise along with the recognition of the Sword Sovereign Palace. There were some sword arts recorded in the Sword Sovereign Palace that Chu Fengmian had never seen before. Now Chu Fengmian could integrate them into the 9 regions' sword arts, bringing him endless benefits. Chapter 826. This sudden change also calmed Chu Fengmian's mind a little. When Chu Fengmian wreaked havoc in the Beimang Palace, he was already prepared to fight to the death. With the Cloud Feather Palace as his trump card, Chu Fengmian wasn't afraid of anything. Therefore, when he killed the ancestors of the Yi clan, he planned to use the Cloud Feather Palace to escape unscathed and leave the Beimang Academy. When he was strong enough, he would return. However, Chu Fengmian never imagined that the Beimang Palace was the Sword Sovereign Palace. The Night Emperor planned to use the Beimang Palace to deal with Chu Fengmian and gave him such an opportunity. In this way, Chu Fengmian had to thank the Night Emperor. If it wasn't for the Night Emperor, Chu Fengmian might not have realized that the Beimang Palace was the Sword Sovereign Palace and missed such an opportunity. The situation was reversed in an instant. Chu Fengmian stood in the air with a relaxed expression. The Xianbei Saint, Vice Principal Deng Ling, and the ancestors of the Beimang Academy were all in a daze. Their eyes flickered as if they were thinking, but they couldn't figure out what had happened. In comparison, the expressions of Yi Huang and the others were extremely gloomy and ugly. This was especially true for the Night Emperor. He was incomparably furious in his heart. If he had not suppressed Chu Fengmian and had instead chosen to directly kill him, there would be no need for him to use the power of the Northern Mang Palace. He would not have caused the Northern Mang Palace to actually stand on Chu Fengmian's side. Even when the four of them joined forces, they were still easily forced back by the sword light. The four founders were already severely injured by the sword. Each of them retreated continuously, their eyes filled with fear. They were afraid that the sword would appear again. At that time, the four of them wouldn't be so lucky. They might be killed. The Martial King, Wind King, and the others were speechless with fear in their eyes. As the founders of the Academy, they were Heaven's mandate experts. Even if they couldn't do as they pleased in the 9 realms, they were still famous characters. They never thought that they would be so close to death. No one dared to make a move. What's going on? What happened to the Northern Mang Palace? Suddenly, a figure flew in from outside. It was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his early 30s. He was dressed in a long robe, and his clothes were extremely noble. He had a lofty aura, as if he had been in a high position for a long time. This middle-aged man was the dean of the Baiming Academy. Normally, he was elusive and mysterious. This was the first time Chu Fengmian had seen him since he arrived at the Baiming Academy. Dean! Dean! The patriarchs present bowed respectfully. The dean of the North Sea Academy had a higher status than the founders because his strength wasn't any weaker than the founders. In fact, at a glance, the headmaster of the Northern Sea Academy was even stronger than Yi Huang and the others. Northern Mang Palace actually recognized a master? What's going on? When the dean of the Northern Mang Academy arrived at the Northern Mang Palace, his mind moved. He used his spiritual sense to scan his surroundings, and his face suddenly revealed an unknowing expression. The entire Northern Mang Palace had undergone earth-shattering changes. What shocked him the most was that the Northern Mang Palace had actually recognized a master. Since the death of the Northern Mang Saint, the Northern Mang Palace had always been located here. Even the Northern Mang Saint wasn't able to make the Northern Mang Palace recognize a master. In the following 10,000 years, countless experts of the Baiming Academy had also tried to make the Northern Mang Palace recognize a master, but to no avail. In the 10,000 years since the establishment of the Baiming Academy, the Northern Mang Palace had never recognized a master. Now that it had suddenly recognized a master, how could he not be surprised? Xianbei, what's going on? The dean of the Baiming Academy looked at the Xianbei saint and suddenly asked. Although he rarely appeared in the Baiming Academy, he was aware of the various things that happened in the academy. Now that the Northern Mang Palace had recognized Chu Fengmian as its master, the first thing he asked was the Xianbei saint. After all, Chu Fengmian was the disciple of the Xianbei saint. I don't know about this either. The Xianbei saint calmly replied. The Xianbei saint didn't know about the various mysteries surrounding Chu Fengmian, so there was no need for him to ask. Every honorable martial artist had their own fortuitous encounters and their own trump card. Even though he was Chu Fengmian's master, he didn't need to ask about them one by one. The Northern Mang Palace has recognized a master. This is a big deal. Our Baiming Academy has never seen such a thing in the past 10,000 years. Yi Huang's eyes flickered as he suddenly spoke to the dean of the Baiming Academy. Dean, this person once received the inheritance of the Northern Mang Saint in the All Saints Hall. Perhaps at that time, he found out about the method to make the Northern Mang Palace recognize a master. This Chu Fengmian is truly too dangerous. He is also too arrogant and looks down on everyone. Such a person cannot be allowed to remain in our Northern Mang Academy. Why don't we capture this person now and force him to reveal the method to make Northern Mang Palace recognize a master? Yi Huang was still unwilling to accept this. Chu Fengmian had killed so many ancestors of the Yi clan in front of him. If he let Chu Fengmian escape unscathed today, he would regret it for the rest of his life. But now that Chu Fengmian had the protection of the Northern Mang Palace, he would only be digging his own grave if he attacked Chu Fengmian. Therefore, he could only place his hopes on the dean of the Beiming Academy. The dean of the Beiming Academy was an extremely mysterious person. His strength surpassed most of the founders. There were even rumors that he was the true #1 expert of the Beiming Academy. Only he could deal with Chu Fengmian. "Yi Huang, do you really want to die?" Hearing Yi Huang's words, Chu Fengmian's eyes flickered and the killing intent in his eyes gathered to the extreme. He had to find a chance to kill Yi Huang. Otherwise, with the hatred that Yi Huang had for Chu Fengmian, there would be endless troubles in the future. But now, Chu Fengmian couldn't directly attack in front of the mysterious dean. "Yi Huang, calm down. Chu Fengmian is still a disciple of our Beiming Academy. Since the Northern Mang Palace has recognized him as a master, it's a good thing for our Beiming Academy." The dean of the Beiming Academy muttered to himself for a while, and suddenly spoke. "Chu Fengmian, do you know why the Northern Mang Palace has recognized you as its master? As long as you say it, this Northern Mang Palace will still be yours. At the very most, this secret will continue to be passed down. After all, this is a secret that our Northern Mang Academy has never known. If you say it, I guarantee you sufficient benefit. I can even make you the next principal of this Northern Mang Academy." Chapter 8:27. The next principal? The crowd was in an uproar. Those old ancestors never imagined that the principal wouldn't come to punish Chu Fengmian, but to promise him such benefits. The principal of the Northern Mang Academy had always been the #1 genius of the Northern Mang Academy. Moreover, it had to be a super expert that had reached the heavenly fate realm. There had never been such a promise made so early in the past. Could it be that the principal wants to rope him in? The same thought appeared in the minds of many old ancestors. Indeed, the strength that Chu Fengmian displayed was too terrifying. It wasn't impossible to turn an enemy into a friend, stabilize Chu Fengmian, and rope him in. After all, Chu Fengmian was the disciple of the Xianbei Saint, a disciple of the Northern Mang Academy. There was no need to fight to the death. Thinking of this, those old ancestors' gazes towards Chu Fengmian changed. Each of them was incomparably fiery as they began to think of ways to rope Chu Fengmian in. Previously, Chu Fengmian had killed Yi Tianjun and pierced through the sky. Those old ancestors couldn't wait to avoid Chu Fengmian. After all, anyone who came into contact with Chu Fengmian at that time would be going against the Yi clan. But if Chu Fengmian really became the next principal of the Northern Mang Academy, then they would have unparalleled benefits in the future if they were to rope Chu Fengmian in now. It seems that the principal has also noticed something. Chu Fengmian's expression was as calm as before when he heard the principal's words, but the corner of his mouth revealed a cold smile. The next principal? If Chu Fengmian were to say it now, he wouldn't be able to live until then. He would be killed by the principal. Ever since Chu Fengmian came to the Northern Mang Academy, he had first obtained the inheritance of the Northern Mang sage from the All Saints Hall. Today, he had also recognized the Northern Mang Palace as its master. All of this meant that Chu Fengmian's identity might be inextricably linked to the Northern Mang sage. The principal of the Northern Mang Academy definitely knew something about the past, but he didn't completely understand it. Therefore, he was trying to fish for information from Chu Fengmian. Once he knew the secret, the first person to die would be Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian didn't think that the principal of the Northern Mang Academy wouldn't want the countless fortuitous encounters and treasures on Chu Fengmian. "I don't know, but when the Yi Huang wanted to kill me, the Northern Mang Palace automatically," Chu Fengmian's face replied. "However, I can't use the Northern Mang Palace's power." "But I can't use Mang Palace's power, it can't use its power, it can protect me. It can only protect me," Chu Fengmian said casually. From his expression, everyone understood that Chu Fengmian definitely knew something. It was just that Chu Fengmian didn't say it out loud. "Dean, this brat is full of lies. Why don't we capture him and torture him? When the time comes, he will spill all his secrets, Yi Huang said viciously to Chu Fengmian. His threat was self-evident. Is that so? Come if you dare. I'm standing right here. Let's see how you can attack me. Chu Fengmian said disdainfully when he heard Yi Huang's words. He stood in the air, and the ancestral dragon supreme sword in his hand suddenly disappeared. He was totally defenseless, waiting for Yi Huang to attack. Yi Huang, Wu Huang and the rest gritted their teeth in anger at Chu Fengmian's arrogance. But Chu Fengmian was standing there. None of them dared to attack Chu Fengmian. The terror of the sword glow from before was still imprinted in their hearts. The two of them did not wish to encounter such a terrifying sword glow a second time. Although they were arrogant, they didn't dare to attack Chu Fengmian. Xianbei, Chu Fengmian is your disciple. The dean of the Northern Mang Academy was silent for a while, as if he was thinking about it. After a long while, he spoke again. Your disciple won the first place on the list of top 100 talents in the Northern region and won glory for the Northern Mang Academy. The 9 regions genius battle is about to begin. I want your disciple to participate in it and win glory for the Northern Mang Academy. What do you think? Hearing the dean of the Northern Mang Academy, Xianbei Saint was silent for a while. He looked at Chu Fengmian and saw Chu Fengmian nodding his head. Yes, as a disciple of the Northern Mang Academy, this is what my disciple should do. Well, the 9 regions genius battle will begin in a month. Chu Fengmian, you will represent the Northern Mang Academy then. The dean of the Northern Mang Academy looked at Chu Fengmian and said, If there's nothing else, you can leave now. Yes. Chu Fengmian nodded his head and turned to leave. Countless ancestors left one after another. No one dared to stop Chu Fengmian. Just as Chu Fengmian was about to step out of the Northern Mang Palace, he suddenly stopped. By the way, the Northern Mang Palace will leave with me. Please leave as soon as possible, Chu Fengmian said calmly. Although this sentence was said casually, it set off a huge wave in the hearts of everyone present. What? The Northern Mang Palace will leave with this person? No. Emperor Yang said abruptly. The Northern Mang Palace has always been the sacred place of our Northern Mang Academy. How can it be taken away by a junior? That's right, kid. The dean is already being merciful by letting you leave. How can you take the Northern Mang Palace away? The Wind Emperor also spoke loudly. The Northern Mang Palace contained countless ancient primal chaos chi. The founders and the ancestors usually hid in the Northern Mang Palace to use the primal chaos chi to increase their strength. Comprehending the realms in the Northern Mang Palace was very fast. If Chu Fengmian took the Northern Mang Palace away, they would no longer have such an opportunity. Chu Fengmian, don't go overboard. The Northern Mang Palace is the sacred place of our Northern Mang Academy. No one can take it away. The Yi Huang also roared. All the ancestors and the 4 founders looked at the dean of the Northern Mang Academy. At this moment only he could make the decision. Chapter 828. Chu Fengmian, the Beimang Palace is the sacred ground of our Beimang Academy. We will not allow you to take it away. The dean of the Beimang Academy looked at Chu Fengmian and slowly said, This is not my decision. It was the artifact spirit of the Beimang Palace that told me. I am only here to inform you. Chu Fengmian said casually. Chu Fengmian, the Beimang Palace is indeed not something that you can take away. Aside from this, you can change your conditions. I will agree to any of them. How about it? The dean's eyes flickered as if he was considering the truth of Chu Fengmian's words. The artifact spirit of the Beimang Palace. Countless ancestors of the Beimang Academy had never spoken to the artifact spirit of the Beimang Palace. Although they had tried to talk to it, they had never responded. Therefore, they were not sure if Chu Fengmian's words were true or false. I don't have any other conditions. I must take away the Beimang Palace today. Chu Fengmian calmly said. Then give it a try. The Yi Huang suddenly roared as his body moved. A huge palm was already heading towards Chu Fengmian, enveloping him. It was as if he wanted to suppress Chu Fengmian with this palm. Everlasting sword. Chu Fengmian stood on the spot as he made his move. The golden sword light appeared once again behind Chu Fengmian as it suddenly slashed towards the Yi Huang. The power of the palm attack that Yi Huang had gathered was completely destroyed in an instant. At the same time, the sword pierced toward Yi Huang's chest. The sword Emperor Palace had already recovered a lot of its strength. Compared to before, this sword strike was much more powerful. The moment the terrifying sword light swept over, the faces of the martial emperor, Emperor Yang and the others turned pale. They could tell that if any of them were to be swept into the sword light, there would only be one outcome, death. Even if the Sword Sovereign Palace only had 20 to 30% of its power, it was still not something that they could contend against. Stop! With a loud roar. Suddenly, the dean of the Beimang Academy gathered his spiritual energy and made his move. With a wave of his sleeve, a surge of spiritual energy burst out and clashed with the sword light. Bang! 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 The two forces clashed with one another, resulting in countless shocking collisions. The strength of the Northern Sea Academy's dean had indeed far surpassed Yi Huang and the others. His attack was comparable to the strength of the Sword Emperor Hall. In the end, the two energies dispersed at the same time. The sword light behind Chu Fengmian disappeared, while the principal of the Northern Sea Academy was forced to take a few steps back. This time, the strength of the Sword Emperor Palace was on par with the strength of the North Sea Academy's dean. This result made Chu Fengmian a little startled. Although he was clear about the strength of the Northern Sea Academy's dean, he was certain that the dean was hiding his true strength. He was definitely an extremely terrifying figure. To be able to fight on equal footing with the Sword Emperor Palace, such strength had to be at least at the 8th step of the life and death stairs, the paramount stage. In fact, it was even possible that he had already reached the 9th level, the Deathless Realm. There was actually such a terrifying expert hidden within the Beimang Academy. The Deathless Realm. In the entire 9 regions, there were only a few people who could step into this realm. Any higher and one could be considered as the pinnacle of the 9 regions. With the presence of the Northern Sea Academy's dean, even if Chu Fengmian had the help of the Sword Emperor Palace, he still wouldn't be able to kill Yi Huang and the others. However, it wouldn't be easy for the dean of the Northern Sea Academy to deal with Chu Fengmian. Although the Sword Emperor Palace couldn't defeat him, it was enough to protect Chu Fengmian. Furthermore, if they were to fall out with Chu Fengmian, it would mean that they had provoked a powerful enemy for the Northern Sea Academy. No matter what, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. Damn it! Yi Huang looked at Chu Fengmian. Although there was still some unwillingness in his heart, he had already understood. Now that Chu Fengmian had the protection of the Northern Sea Palace, even the dean of the Northern Sea Academy could only fight on equal footing with him. It was impossible for him to kill Chu Fengmian. Unless there was an expert like the dean of the Northern Sea Academy who could kill Chu Fengmian at all costs. However, even then they would have to pay a great price. At the very least, the dean of the Northern Sea Academy didn't intend to do so. Since the weapon spirit of the Northern Sea Palace has chosen to follow you, I won't stop you. The dean of the Northern Sea Academy looked at the 4 founders and the countless old ancestors and said slowly, "Let's go." Yes. Even though the old ancestors who were watching from the sidelines were unwilling to leave, they had all witnessed the battle that had just taken place. If even the dean of the Northern Sea Academy couldn't stop Chu Fengmian, they wouldn't be able to stop him either. Yi Huang, Wu Huang and the others looked at Chu Fengmian with eyes full of resentment and unwillingness. Then they left. Chu Fengmian waited until all the cultivators in the Northern Sea Palace had left before he spoke to the Xianbei saint beside him. "Let's go too." As he spoke, Chu Fengmian turned into a ray of light and left. The Xianbei saint followed closely behind and left together. After the two of them left the northern Mang Palace, the incomparably huge northern Mang Palace suddenly shrunk in the depths of the void. It directly turned into a ray of golden light and drilled into Chu Fengmian's body. For a spiritual artifact of the Sword Sovereign Palace's level, shrinking its size was naturally an easy task. I didn't expect you to have the help of the Northern Sea Palace. In that case, I can be at ease. The Xianbei Saint looked at Chu Fengmian and couldn't help but sigh. When he first met Chu Fengmian was still an inconspicuous little fellow. Apart from his decent aptitude, there was nothing outstanding about him. He didn't expect Chu Fengmian to grow to such an extent in just a few years. He killed the old ancestor, the vice dean, and went against the Yi clan. He was already an old ancestor. Now that Chu Fengmian had the help of the Northern Sea Palace, unless he encountered a true old ancestor or someone at the peak of the 9 regions, he would be able to escape unscathed. The 9 regions genius battle is extremely beneficial to you. You must go. However, you must be careful. The Yi clan will definitely not let this matter rest. After Saint Xianbei said this, his body moved and he disappeared. He had come to save Chu Fengmian. Now that Chu Fengmian was safe and sound, he had his own matters to attend to. His body moved and he broke through the void and left. As for Chu Fengmian, he was also in the void. He broke through space and stepped into it. Chapter 829. In Sword Comprehension Peak. Chu Fengmian had been comprehending sword techniques in Sword Comprehension Peak ever since he returned from Beimang Palace. The battle in Beimang Palace, especially the battle with Yi Huang and the others, had benefited Chu Fengmian greatly. It was Chu Fengmian's first time fighting with such a powerful expert. It was of great help to Chu Fengmian's comprehension of sword techniques. Chu Fengmian had also comprehended the countless sword techniques recorded in the Sword Sovereign Palace and integrated them into the 9 regions' sword technique. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, Chu Fengmian had already spent 7 days in Sword Comprehension Peak. In these 7 days, Chu Fengmian had been wholeheartedly cultivating his sword technique. The aura and sword intent that erupted from Chu Fengmian's body had reached its peak and gradually began to calm down. Although the sword intent had calmed down, the aura on Chu Fengmian's body was much more terrifying than before. "Young lord, you're awake?" Just as Chu Fengmian opened his eyes, the golden spiritual sword, the spiritual artifact of the Sword Sovereign Palace, Yunjian, appeared beside Chu Fengmian and asked in shock. "I didn't expect that you're still alive, young lord. Furthermore, your appearance has completely changed. If it wasn't for the fact that your sword intent hasn't changed, even I wouldn't be able to recognize you." Previously in Beimang Palace, the situation was urgent, so Yunjian didn't ask too much. Now that things had settled down, he was extremely curious about Chu Fengmian. Even the Lord of the Sword Dao had perished in the calamity 10,000 years ago. Even Chu Fengmian's eldest senior brother had survived the calamity, but he had suffered grievous injuries and perished not long after. However, Chu Fengmian was just a powerless cripple at that time. Not to mention surviving the calamity, even if he did, he wouldn't be able to live for 10,000 years. "Young lord, you can actually cultivate spiritual power?" Yunjian asked in surprise. This was what shocked him the most. In his previous life, Chu Fengmian's comprehension of the Sword Dao could be said to be perfect. However, at that time, Chu Fengmian had the 9 extremes physique. He couldn't cultivate any spiritual power in his entire life. He could only become a cripple who couldn't use spiritual power. It wasn't just the master of the Sword Dao who felt this way. Even Yunjian felt extremely sorry for Chu Fengmian. How could such a genius of the Sword Dao be unable to cultivate spiritual energy? No matter how high Chu Fengmian's understanding of swordsmanship was, without the support of strength, it was meaningless. Any warrior could destroy Chu Fengmian. But now, after meeting Chu Fengmian, an earth-shaking change had taken place. Everything had changed. "Actually, I've already fallen 10,000 years ago. Chu Fengmian looked at Yunjian and slowly opened his mouth. He did not need to worry about Yunjian and could speak freely. However, a few years ago I was suddenly reborn into this body. I don't know what happened. Chu Fengmian told Yunjian everything that had happened in the past few years. Reincarnation? How is this possible? Yunjian was shocked when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. The legend of reincarnation was heard in almost every era in the 9 domains. However, even the master of the sword Dao, an invincible figure in the 9 domains, shook his head when reincarnation was mentioned. It was absolutely impossible. Even such a top figure felt that reincarnation was an illusory thing. If one were to ask any expert in the 9 domains, they would only shake their heads and say that it was impossible. But now, Chu Fengmian had appeared in front of Yunjian. Yunjian couldn't help but believe that reincarnation was real. Do you know why you were reincarnated? Yunjian couldn't help but ask. Logically speaking, if reincarnation really existed, it should be possible for the top experts in the 9 domains to do so. In his previous life, Chu Fengmian had the 9 extremes physique. He couldn't even cultivate, so how could he be reincarnated? I don't know. Ever since I jumped off the heaven-ceasing peak, I lost consciousness for a while. I only woke up 10,000 years later. Chu Fengmian shook his head. Chu Fengmian had always wanted to know why he was reincarnated, but until now, he still didn't know. Maybe it was a coincidence. There will be some strange phenomena in the 9 domains from time to time. Maybe my reincarnation was one of them. Chu Fengmian said. Forget it. Maybe when my strength is enough to reach the top of the 9 domains, I will be able to find out what is going on. There is no point in guessing now. Chu Fengmian knew that the 9 domains were far more mysterious than he had imagined. In particular, the 9 domains weren't the entire world. There was another universe beyond the 9 domains. In this life, he came into contact with Xing Xian and knew one more thing. There was always someone better than him. What was hidden beyond the 9 domains? Chu Fengmian was still far from knowing. With your aptitude, there is indeed a great possibility that you can reach the top of the 9 domains in this life. Yunjian glanced at Chu Fengmian and suddenly said, You ate the 9 transformation heaven-seizing pill? Yunjian glanced at Chu Fengmian's body and felt that the aptitude of Chu Fengmian's body could only be described as terrifying. It was more monstrous than any of the geniuses he had seen. Back in the Sword Emperor Palace, Chu Fengmian's senior brothers and sisters were all geniuses and monstrous. They were definitely more monstrous than the geniuses of the 7 great sections. However, none of them were comparable to Chu Fengmian's current aptitude. However, I met Qing Luan and he gave me the 9 transformation heaven-seizing pill. Chu Fengmian nodded and said, Without the 9 transformation heaven-seizing pill, Chu Fengmian wouldn't have his current achievement. Master really gave the 9 transformation heaven-seizing pill to Qing Luan and then you got it? Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, Yunjian was a little surprised and muttered to himself. Could it be that Master really knows about the changes that will happen 10,000 years later? What happened? Chu Fengmian immediately asked after hearing Yunjian's word. Master seemed to have sensed something a few days before the calamity. At that time, he called Qing Luan over and gave the 9 transformation heaven-seizing pill to Qing Luan so that he could take it away. Yunjian slowly opened his mouth and said, As the artifact spirit of the Sword Emperor Hall, everything he did was carried out under his supervision. At that time, Yunjian only felt a little strange as to why the Master of Sword Dao would do such a thing. However, seeing Chu Fengmian now, Yunjian suddenly felt a little strange. Chapter 830. What? Hearing Yunjian's words, Chu Fengmian suddenly had a strange feeling in his heart. He originally thought that meeting Qing Luan and obtaining the 9 transformation heaven-seizing pill was just a coincidence. However, after hearing Yunjian's words, it seemed that all of this wasn't a coincidence, but was destined. Could it be that Master had already thought of all of this 10,000 years ago? Chu Fengmian's mind was somewhat puzzled. Was all of this a coincidence, or was it destined? Master's strength has already reached the peak of the 9 domains. Perhaps he had already foreseen what would happen 10,000 years later, and did it on purpose. Yunjian muttered to himself in a low voice. If you really want to understand all of this, it will only be possible when your strength reaches the level of my former master. That's right. Chu Fengmian also nodded. No matter how much he guessed, it was meaningless. If he really wanted to understand all of this, he could only reach the level of the Master of Sword Dao. At that time, all of the mysteries would be revealed. Chu Fengmian closed his eyes again. He no longer pondered about this, but devoted himself to cultivation. Previously, in the returning ruined sky, Chu Fengmian had killed countless Yi clan ancestors. The blood essence of these Yi clan ancestors had all been devoured by Chu Fengmian. Now, it had been dormant in Chu Fengmian's body for a long time. For Chu Fengmian, realm was as important as sword skills. Without sufficient strength, no matter how strong one's sword skills were, they couldn't be displayed. It was just like Chu Fengmian in his previous life. His sword skills were unparalleled in the world, but he couldn't cultivate spiritual power. In the end, he was no different from an ordinary person who couldn't even truss a chicken. If he wanted to increase his strength, a breakthrough in realm was also crucial. Fight! Chu Fengmian shouted angrily. The ancient war dragon silhouette that was condensed from the war dragon skill suddenly appeared behind him. 1/3 of the ancient war dragon's silhouette had already been condensed. A total of 42,000 drops of ancient war dragon's blood essence had been condensed. This was the foundation of Chu Fengmian's current strength. It could be said that Chu Fengmian now possessed close to 1/3 of the ancient battle dragon's power. It was this power that allowed Chu Fengmian to have the capital to contend with Heaven's Mandate experts like Yi Huang. Currently, his 8th level of life and death realm had already reached the limit, and he could break through at any time. Chu Fengmian's mind, the blood essence of the Yi clan ancestors he had killed were all refined into the purest spiritual power and integrated into Chu Fengmian's body. Of Chu Fengmian's body began to condense. Chu Fengmian closed his eyes. The ancient war dragon phantasm behind him was roaring continuously. Drops of ancient war dragon essence blood were being condensed continuously. These Yi family patriarchs were all characters who had transcended life and death. Each of them had countless fortuitous encounters. Their blood essence was truly a great supplement for Chu Fengmian. The Yi family could be considered a colossal family in any of the 9 domains. Most of the Yi family's patriarchs had died at Chu Fengmian's hands. Time passed second by second. Finally, after a day, the ancient battle dragon's shadow behind Chu Fengmian's back started to slow down and gradually came to a stop. The amount of ancient battle dragon's blood essence in Chu Fengmian's body had already reached 50,000 drops. The limit of life and death realm is 50,000 drops? Chu Fengmian could already feel that the power in his body had reached a bottleneck. Even if Chu Fengmian were to devour more blood essence, it would be meaningless. This was the bottleneck of life and death realm. Chu Fengmian's current realm had already surpassed the 9th level of life and death realm, and reached the peak of life and death realm. Unless Chu Fengmian made another breakthrough and stepped into life-shattering realm, his realm would not be able to take another step forward. Devouring blood essence would no longer have any meaning. Chu Fengmian slowly opened his eyes. Waves of terrifying aura were released from his body. The pressure on Chu Fengmian's body was no different from that of those old antiques who had transcended life and death. These waves of pressure surrounded Chu Fengmian. With a thought from Chu Fengmian, all of them turned into ancient war dragons, circling around Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian could feel that as long as he took another step forward, he would be able to transcend life and death realm. Chu Fengmian's current strength was a lot stronger than before he caused havoc in Baiming Palace. Moreover, Chu Fengmian had also found the Sword Emperor Palace after returning to Baiming Academy. All of these had brought him a lot of opportunities. There are still dangers everywhere in Baiming Academy. With my current strength, I can only protect myself. Chu Fengmian couldn't help but sigh. Although his strength had made some progress, Chu Fengmian would still lose if he were to fight against Sky Fate realm experts such as Yi Huang and the others. After all, his realm was still too low. He was 7 levels away from Sky Fate realm. It was extremely difficult to cross 7 levels. For most of the warriors, crossing 7 levels was simply a pipe dream. Chu Fengmian relied on the Dragon War art and his various fortuitous encounters to obtain such strength. This was already amazing enough. However, a Heavenly Mandate realm expert was still a great threat to Chu Fengmian right now. Yi Huang, Wu Huang, these people must be killed. Chu Fengmian's eyes were filled with killing intent. Yi Huang, Wu Huang and the others hated Chu Fengmian to the core. They would never let Chu Fengmian go. Chu Fengmian must kill them. However, Chu Fengmian didn't have any chance in Baiming Academy. The mysterious dean was still too powerful. Chu Fengmian could only rely on the Sword Emperor Palace to protect himself at most. It was impossible for Chu Fengmian to kill them now. His strength was still not enough. I have to take another step forward. When I transcend life and death, I might be able to fight against the dean. At that time, I will be able to eradicate all the enemies in Baiming Academy. Chapter 831. 9 Regions Genius Battle. Chu Fengmian muttered. When he left the Northern Mang Palace, the principal of the Northern Mang Academy had told him about it. Chu Fengmian had heard of the 9 Regions Genius Battle before. It was a tradition that had been passed down since ancient times. Every 10 years, a battle would be held. All the geniuses of the 9 regions would participate. Moreover, the 9 regions genius battle was much more terrifying than the Northern Martial Battle Assembly. The Northern Martial Battle Assembly would only allow life and death realm warriors to participate. In the 9 regions genius battle, there was no lack of people who had transcended life and death. As long as they were under 100 years old, they were qualified to participate. For many of the geniuses of the 7 great sects, they had already transcended life and death when they were 40 or 50 years old. Therefore, the 9 regions genius battle was an incomparably cruel battle. However, although it was cruel, there would be countless warriors who would participate in it tirelessly. Although the 9 regions genius battle was cruel, it was a life and death battle. As long as one could stand out from the crowd, their strength would increase by more than a level. Furthermore, the 9 regions genius battle was being held in a historical site, the ancient fighting arena. In the battles, if one performed outstandingly, they would be rewarded by the ancient battle arena. The ancient battle arena had existed for hundreds of thousands of years. Chu Fengmian had seen this name in countless ancient books. However, the tradition would never change. The true geniuses would be rewarded. These rewards were treasures that even the 7 great sects didn't have. Therefore, this was enough to attract countless warriors to participate. This year's 9 regions genius battle is actually about to begin? Chu Fengmian muttered. In his previous life, he had also participated in the 9 regions genius battle. However, he could only watch from the side. After all, Chu Fengmian didn't have any strength at that time. He had long wanted to participate in the 9 regions genius battle. It seemed that this time, Chu Fengmian had caught the opportunity. Chu Fengmian wanted to transcend life and death, but it was easier said than done. It was much more difficult for him to transcend life and death compared to ordinary warriors. Although Chu Fengmian was only a step away from transcending life and death, this step was still extremely far away for him. Even now, Chu Fengmian still didn't know how to take this step. If one wanted to break through, the most important thing was to temper oneself in numerous battles of life and death. To the central region, Chu Fengmian stood up. He had already made up his mind. The 9 regions genius tournament would be held in the central region, the ancient Colosseum. In the 9 regions, there was a saying, if you don't enter the central region, you won't be able to walk the path of an expert. The central region was the place with the most experts in the entire 9 regions. It was also the most prosperous place. If one wanted to become an expert, one had to go to the central region and stand out among the countless geniuses. Previously, Chu Fengmian's strength wasn't enough, so he would only be throwing his life away if he went to the central region. But now, Chu Fengmian was full of confidence. Chu Fengmian's current strength was no longer the same as before. It was enough for him to stand on equal footing with those who had transcended life and death. He was definitely not a weakling in the central region. Moreover, Chu Fengmian still had the Cloud Feather Palace and the Sword Emperor Palace as his trump cards. If he encountered danger, he could use the Sword Emperor Palace to save his life. Although the Sword Emperor Palace had devoured a large amount of Chu Fengmian's spiritual stones, his spiritual energy was still recovering. Chu Fengmian didn't dare to use the Sword Emperor Palace under normal circumstances. After all, Chu Fengmian couldn't afford to feed such a glutton. Chu Fengmian didn't even have enough spiritual stones to break through, so how could he support the consumption of the Sword Emperor Palace? Therefore, Chu Fengmian wouldn't use the Sword Emperor Palace unless he had no other choice. Fortunately, Chu Fengmian's current strength wasn't something that could be easily manipulated by others. Boom! Chu Fengmian's figure flew out from the Sword Comprehension Peak. His figure moved and suddenly broke through the space, disappearing from the Northern Mang Academy. Seeing Chu Fengmian leave, countless old ancestors were sitting in a mysterious space in the Northern Mang Academy. This mysterious space was also a sacred place in the Northern Mang Academy, but it couldn't be compared to the Northern Mang Palace. But now that Chu Fengmian had taken the Northern Mang Palace away, they could only come here to cultivate. Chu Fengmian has left. Looks like he's really going to the central region. A brat who doesn't know his place. Since he dares to go to the central region, then he doesn't need to think about coming back to the northern region. In the deepest part of the mysterious space, an old man sat on the ground, the Yi Emperor, and coldly said, "So what if this brat has the protection of the Northern Mang Palace? The Northern Mang Palace can't protect him forever." The martial emperor, who sat beside him, coldly said. Their hatred for Chu Fengmian was endless and couldn't be washed away. In their hearts they were almost always thinking about how to kill Chu Fengmian. He actually dared to take the Northern Mang Palace away. This brat definitely has some relationship with the sage. However, the Northern Mang Saint is already a dead man. The Northern Mang Academy belongs to us. This brat must die. He can't be left alive. Another sinister voice resounded. This voice didn't seem to be one that Chu Fengmian had seen before. It was an extremely unfamiliar voice. Everyone, Chu Fengmian must die. However, before he dies, we can still make use of him to do something. A chuckle resounded. It was the dean of the Northern Mang Academy. The corner of his mouth revealed a faint smile. His gaze was fixed on Chu Fengmian as he watched Chu Fengmian leave the Northern Mang Academy and head towards the central region. "I've already made a plan. Everyone, don't worry. The Northern Mang Academy will definitely belong to us. The Northern Mang Saint is just a dead man. His descendants have already been chased away by us. How can a brat like him overturn the heavens? That's right. Since the dean has already made a plan, then let's wait." The voice in the mysterious space gradually quietened down. At the same time, Chu Fengmian had already left the Northern Mang Academy and headed towards the central region. His current strength was no longer the same as before. Even without the help of the teleportation array, his speed was extremely fast. Chu Fengmian moved his feet and created a passage in the void. The passage was extremely stable. Chu Fengmian wasn't affected by the spatial storm as he walked through it. He was able to travel 1,000 miles in a day. Chapter 832. Central Region. The Central Region had always been the leader of the 9 regions. The Central Region was the largest and most prosperous region among the 9 regions. The countless resources in the central region had given birth to countless geniuses and experts. 4 of the 7 major sects were located in the central region. It was enough to show how powerful and prosperous the central region was. Central region border. A figure suddenly flew out from the void. It was Chu Fengmian. In the north region, Chu Fengmian could fly unscrupulously. With his strength, no one would dare to stop him. However, Chu Fengmian could not be so arrogant in the central region. The 7 major sects were much more powerful than the Beimang Academy. If Chu Fengmian acted rashly, it would easily cause unnecessary trouble. Chu Fengmian's figure slowly appeared in a mountain range in the central region. A nostalgic look suddenly appeared in his eyes as he looked at the various things in the middle region. The heaven-ceasing peak was located in the central region. It could be said that Chu Fengmian grew up in the central region in his previous life. Now that he had returned to the central region, Chu Fengmian felt nostalgic. It has been 10,000 years since I last saw it. The central region has changed tremendously. Chu Fengmian looked at his surroundings and felt that it was extremely unfamiliar. In his previous life, he could be considered to have traveled all over the central region. However, when Chu Fengmian looked around, the surrounding scenery had changed. It was completely different from 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years had passed. Things had remained the same, but people had changed. I'll go back and take a look at the heaven-ceasing peak if I have the chance in the future. Chu Fengmian looked into the distance. It was the direction of the heaven-ceasing peak. Although he had come to the central region, it was not convenient for him to go back to the heaven-ceasing peak. After all, the heaven-ceasing peak was the place where the Sword Master once lived. It was very likely that it had fallen into the control of the 7 major sects. If Chu Fengmian went back rashly, it was very likely that he would be discovered by the 7 major sects. At that time, Chu Fengmian would be in endless trouble. With Chu Fengmian's current strength, going against the 7 major sects was like hitting a rock with an egg. The central region is more prosperous than it was 10,000 years ago. Chu Fengmian looked around and sighed. Compared to the desolation of the northern region, the central region could be said to be completely desolate. On the plain in front of Chu Fengmian, there were hundreds of cities of various sizes. Each city had tens of millions of people. Just this plain alone was comparable to countless countries in the northern region. It had a large population and abundant resources. All of this represented the strength of the central region. Chu Fengmian felt that even the underground dragon veins in the central region were much larger than those in the north region. Chu Fengmian's divine veins seemed to be able to communicate with the underground dragon veins much faster in the central region. In the northern region, Chu Fengmian had only felt that his spiritual power could be restored. However, after coming to the central region, Chu Fengmian actually felt that his divine pulse seemed to be able to extract the power of the underground dragon vein. Condense. Chu Fengmian closed his eyes and condensed his spiritual power. In the palm of his hand, a spiritual stone slowly condensed. This spiritual stone was sparkling and translucent. It was a royal-grade spiritual stone. In any of the 9 regions, spiritual stones were a form of currency. They were extremely valuable. Royal-grade spiritual stones were something that many powerhouses needed. Originally, Chu Fengmian used his sword essence to transform into a divine sky-devouring python. He could only condense spiritual stones in places with rich spiritual power. However, with the increase of Chu Fengmian's strength and the power of the underground dragon vein in the central region, Chu Fengmian could condense spiritual stones almost anywhere in the central region. In a short moment, hundreds of royal-grade spiritual stones were condensed in front of Chu Fengmian. If this scene was seen by others, they would be so shocked that their eyes would fall out. The power of the underground dragon vein in the central region was indeed very powerful. However, it was easier said than done to communicate with it. An ordinary martial artist might not be able to condense more than a few spiritual stones in a year. Therefore, it was impossible for them to do what Chu Fengmian did. However, Chu Fengmian had the divine pulse and was blessed by the heavens. It was extremely easy for him to communicate with the underground dragon vein. He could condense countless royal-grade spiritual stones with a wave of his hand. Moreover, the spiritual power of the underground dragon vein was almost endless. Chu Fengmian did not need to worry about being discovered like he did in the Beimang Academy. Even if Chu Fengmian extracted the spiritual power of the underground dragon vein for 10,000 years, the spiritual power of the underground dragon vein would not decrease by 1/10. Therefore, Chu Fengmian could easily extract the spiritual power at any time. With enough wealth, it's possible to refine a real saint-grade spiritual elixir. Chu Fengmian's eyes suddenly flickered. It was almost impossible for Chu Fengmian to transcend life and death. He had to use some elixirs and rare items to increase his chances of breaking through. However, most of the elixirs were meaningless to a martial artist at Chu Fengmian's level. For example, if Chu Fengmian swallowed an ordinary heaven-grade elixir, it would be as meaningless as jelly beans. Among all the elixirs, only the legendary saint-grade spiritual elixir was still useful to him. It was also known as the top-grade heaven-grade spiritual elixir. Although it was known as the top-grade heaven-grade spiritual elixir, most people were more willing to call it the saint-grade spiritual elixir because it was completely different from the heaven-grade spiritual elixir. The saint-grade spiritual elixir was known as the saint-grade spiritual elixir. It was very useful to martial artists of any realm in the 9 regions. The 9 transformation heaven-seizing elixir that Chu Fengmian had swallowed was also a saint-grade spiritual elixir. It was enough to seize the fortune of God. If Chu Fengmian wanted to break through and transcend life and death, the best way was to use the saint-grade spiritual elixir to increase his chances of breaking through. However, the value of the saint-grade spiritual elixir was much higher than a heaven-grade spiritual weapon. It was comparable to the ancestral dragon's paragon sword and the war dragon treasure carriage. Every elixir needed to refine it was rare in the 9 regions. It could be said that it was wishful thinking to refine the saint-grade spiritual elixir without great wealth. The 9 transformation heaven-seizing elixir could only be refined by the master of the sword principle, who was one of the top figures in the 9 regions. Originally, Chu Fengmian didn't want to refine the saint-grade spiritual elixir. However, Chu Fengmian suddenly had the ability to condense spiritual stones. It was almost unlimited wealth that Chu Fengmian had this idea. Chu Fengmian had read a lot of ancient books in his previous life. Chu Fengmian still remembered the refining method of the saint-grade spiritual elixir. However, he didn't have enough spiritual power back then. Secondly, he didn't have the materials to refine it. This time, however, he could give it a try. Chapter 833. Although the ingredients for the saint-grade spirit elixir were extremely difficult to find, it was possible to collect all of them if one had endless wealth. Chu Fengmian thought to himself, "Money makes the world go round." As long as he had enough wealth, Chu Fengmian was confident that he could collect all of the ingredients needed for the saint-grade spirit elixir. Of course, in a place like the North region, even if he had enough wealth, it was impossible to do so. However, this was the Central region. It was not impossible to collect a set of ingredients for the saint-grade spirit elixir. Chu Fengmian was already formulating a plan in his heart as he thought about it. The ingredients for the saint-grade spirit elixir could not be found in ordinary places. At least, he had to go to some bustling commercial cities. Some of the big chambers of commerce might have kept them. Chu Fengmian was thinking about the plan as he flew in the central region. He looked around and found that there was a lot of demon qi in front of him. In front of Chu Fengmian was a huge valley. The demonic aura was emerging from the valley, rendering the entire valley into a demonic valley. There is a saint-grade herb in this demon valley? Chu Fengmian suddenly discerned a unique fragrance amidst the boundless demonic qi. This fragrance belonged to the fragrance of a sacred medicine. Saint-grade herbs were essential for the saint-grade spirit elixir. A saint-grade spirit elixir required at least dozens of saint-grade herbs to refine. He did not expect that the saint-grade herb would come to him just as he was about to refine the saint-grade spirit elixir. Let's go. Chu Fengmian did not hesitate. He moved his body and flew toward the Demon Valley. When he was close to the Demon Valley, Chu Fengmian suddenly stopped in the air. Someone is fighting in there? Chu Fengmian had just approached the Demon Valley when he felt the waves of spiritual energy coming from the Demon Valley. Obviously, there were people fighting in there. Moreover, the spiritual energy waves were transmitted so far away. The warriors fighting in there were definitely not weak. Let's go and take a look. Chu Fengmian mused for a moment. Then, his body moved and he flew towards the Devil's Valley. With his strength, he was not afraid of encountering any danger. Moreover, Chu Fengmian was determined to obtain the sacred medicine within the Devil's Valley. This is an array formation? The moment Chu Fengmian approached the Devil Valley, the surrounding devil chi seemed to have sensed Chu Fengmian's existence. All of them attacked Chu Fengmian. The devil chi stacked on top of each other like chains. All of them attacked Chu Fengmian as if they were trying to seal him up. Only then did Chu Fengmian notice that this demonic valley was actually shrouded by an incomparably huge array formation, which forcibly turned this valley into a demonic valley. Looks like this was done by that little devil again. Chu Fengmian chuckled when he saw this scene. Facing the attack of the endless demonic chi, he pointed his finger lightly, and the demonic chi in front of Chu Fengmian was all shattered. Chu Fengmian's body flashed and directly rushed in. Two figures appeared before Chu Fengmian's eyes the moment he entered the Devil Valley. These two figures were a man and a woman. The man was clothed in black, and his body was stained with countless bloodstains. He seemed to be the master of this demonic valley, and his cultivation was around the 9th level of life and death realm. As for the woman, she didn't look old, only in her early 20s. However, her cultivation had reached the 8th level of life and death realm. She could be considered a genius. However, the woman's strength was clearly a little inferior. Moreover, the man was on his home ground. It was a one-sided situation. The man continued to attack, while the woman could only evade and defend. She was unable to rush out of the valley. In this way, it wouldn't take long for the woman to fall. There was no suspense. Gu Clan's second miss, I didn't expect you to be so stupid. You even dared to come to this demonic valley. Do you really think you can kill me? How laughable. This lord hasn't killed anyone from Gu Clan. Today, I'll use your blood to refine my spirit weapon. The man had gained the upper hand and laughed loudly. A white bone spirit sword suddenly appeared in his hand. He suddenly slashed out. This slash contained an extremely frightening sword intent. The monstrous demonic intent was also condensed within it. He was prepared to kill the woman with this slash. Not good. Despair appeared on the woman's face. Especially when she sensed the terror of this sword, her face turned incomparably pale. She originally thought that she could kill this man, which was why she mistakenly entered this demonic valley. However, she didn't expect that everything was a trap. She was thoroughly tricked, and now she couldn't escape even if she wanted to. Die. The man coldly smiled. The sword slashed down. Under this terrifying sword, the spiritual energy condensed on the woman's body was instantly shattered. The terrifying sword swept past the woman's body. In the next moment, the woman's body would be mercilessly torn apart by the sword. The man's face revealed a triumphant look. However, right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. An incomparably huge palm suddenly descended from the sky and appeared in front of the woman. It forcibly grabbed the sword and directly crushed it. The one who made this move was Chu Fengmian. People of 9 Demons City. I didn't expect that there would be little demons like you in the central region. Who's there? The man was also taken aback, as if he had not expected that someone would actually step in and block his sword at this moment. Moreover, he had already arranged layers of restrictions in this demonic valley. However, someone still managed to break in. What? So another one has come to die. However, when the man saw Chu Fengmian and sensed his aura, his face gradually calmed down. Peak life and death realm was on par with him. Even if he could break into this demonic valley, it wouldn't be a big deal. In this demonic valley, as long as it wasn't someone who had transcended life and death, he wouldn't be afraid. Good, another one came to die. Then, the two of you will die together. Meddlesome trash. The man shouted. Suddenly, he slashed his sword at Chu Fengmian. This sword was incomparably fierce. It was definitely a killing move. Blood dyed the sword's edge. Waves of demonic intent turned into demonic gods, adding to the sword's edge. The thousand demonic sword wanted to directly behead someone. Chapter 834. Senior, be careful. This is the secret technique of Nine Demons City. The lady was delighted when she saw Chu Fengmian's sudden appearance. She quickly reminded him. However, her words seemed a little unnecessary. The moment the tip of the sword was about to touch Chu Fengmian gently lifted his hand and pointed with his finger. The sword tip turned into ashes right in front of Chu Fengmian. Not a single bit of spiritual energy could touch Chu Fengmian's body. What? The man clearly did not expect his sword to be blocked so easily by Chu Fengmian. His eyes flickered and suddenly, his sword flashed again. This time, it changed direction and suddenly slashed towards the outside of the Devil's Valley. At the same time, the man's body merged with the sword. He wanted to follow the sword and escape from the Devil Valley. Trying to escape? Stay here. Chu Fengmian sneered. How could he let go of someone from Nine Demon City? Chu Fengmian clenched his hand and the sword beside the man shattered instantly. The man's body was caught by Chu Fengmian on the spot. He fell into Chu Fengmian's palm and was crushed into pieces. The man's vitality was completely devoured by Chu Fengmian. This Blood Sword Overlord died just like that? When she saw that man, the Blood Sword Demon Venerable, being squashed to death by Chu Fengmian so easily, the woman was still in a daze, unable to react. The Blood Sword Overlord was a notorious devil in the central region. She had almost died in the hands of the Blood Sword Overlord, but now, he was defeated by Chu Fengmian so easily. This kind of strength was extremely rare among the disciples of the 7 major sections. After the shock, the lady gradually recovered and looked at Chu Fengmian with gratitude. Senior, thank you for saving me. I am very grateful. Your surname is Gu? Is this the Gu family of Ning Province Ancient City? Chu Fengmian suddenly asked when he saw the lady. Yes, it's the Gu family of Ning Province Ancient City. My name is Gu Jin, a disciple of the Gu family of Ning Province. Gu Jin nodded and said to Chu Fengmian, May I know Senior's name? Which sect are you from? My name is Chu Fengmian. I am not a disciple of the Central Region. I just came here by chance to handle some matters. Chu Fengmian said calmly. Chu Fengmian roughly guessed her background after hearing her surname. In the north of the Central Region, there was a city called the Ning Prefecture Ancient City. It was a commercial city in the Central Region and was incomparably prosperous. Originally, Chu Fengmian had planned to head to the Ning Prefecture Ancient City to see if he could buy the sacred medicine needed to refine the Saint-Grade elixir. He did not expect to coincidentally save a member of the Gu clan. Your injuries aren't light. You should recover first. We'll talk later. Chu Fengmian glanced at Gu Jin and said. Gu Jin had been forced into a desperate situation by the Blood Sword Demon Reverend and had suffered serious injuries. If she did not recover soon, it might affect her cultivation level. This is a pill. It should be enough for you to recover. Chu Fengmian scanned the space ring of the Blood Sword Overlord and saw a jade bottle. He passed it to Gu Jin. This kind of healing pill was meaningless to Chu Fengmian. It was useless for him to keep it. This, Gu Jin looked at the pill that Chu Fengmian handed over and hesitated for a moment. She then thought of her injuries and took it. Indeed, now was not the time to be polite. It would be troublesome if her injuries were to worsen and her cultivation level was affected. Thank you, Senior. Gu Jin took the elixir and hurriedly sat on the ground. He swallowed the elixir and began to cultivate slowly to heal his injuries. At the same time, Chu Fengmian was looking around in the Devil Valley. Suddenly, he looked at a direction. In Chu Fengmian's sight there was a cave. The aura of the sacred medicine was coming from this cave. Chu Fengmian approached the cave. The entrance of the cave was shrouded in demonic qi. Obviously, someone had set up a restriction to prevent people from entering. However, such a restriction was extremely fragile in front of Chu Fengmian. He waved his hand and a wave of spiritual energy swept across, shattering all the restrictions. Chu Fengmian moved his feet and stepped into the cave. There was a small pond in the depths of the cave. However, the pond was not filled with water. It was filled with extremely pure spiritual energy. The spiritual energy was condensed into liquid by a supreme method. The entire pond was filled with the purest spiritual energy. There was a vine growing on top of the pond. The vine was black-purple in color and seemed to be different from ordinary vines. It was not a fragrant medicinal fragrance, but a pungent demonic aura. Moreover, the vine was continuously devouring the surrounding demonic aura. Every time it devoured, the demonic aura on the vine would become a little stronger. Divine Cleansing Vine. It's actually the Divine Cleansing Vine. Chu Fengmian's face lit up when he saw the vine. The Divine Cleansing Vine was a versatile sacred medicine. It could be said that it was a necessary item to refine any kind of elixir. Every medicine had its own poison. The most crucial point in refining an elixir was how to remove the poison within the elixir. This Divine Cleansing Vine was the best way to remove the poison. As long as other elixirs were refined together with this Divine Cleansing Vine, it would be enough to completely remove the poison within. Chu Fengmian wanted to refine the saint-grade spiritual elixir, so the Divine Cleansing Vine was a necessary item. Otherwise, the poison in the sacred medicine would be enough to make Chu Fengmian die suddenly if he swallowed it. It would appear that the blood sword demon Exalted wanted to demonize this Divine Cleansing Vine and nurture it into a 10,000 demonic vine to increase his strength. That was the reason why he had placed this Divine Cleansing Vine here to nurture it. The demonic qi that enveloped it was precisely for this Divine Cleansing Vine to devour. However, the Divine Cleansing Vine had now fallen into Chu Fengmian's hands. Rise! Chu Fengmian suddenly grabbed the Divine Cleansing Vine in his hand. Then, a drop of golden blood flew out from Chu Fengmian's fingertip and surrounded the Divine Cleansing Vine, burning it. The demonic will on the Divine Cleansing Vine was gradually dispelled by the flame. Then, the Divine Cleansing Vine revealed its normal greenish appearance. It was no different from a normal Divine Cleansing Vine. Not bad. I've already found one of the necessary items to refine the saint-grade spiritual elixir. It's a good start. Chu Fengmian smiled and put the Divine Cleansing Vine into his empty ring. He had just arrived in the central region and he had already obtained the Divine Cleansing Vine. He was indeed lucky. Chapter 835. When Chu Fengmian obtained the Deity Cleansing Vine, Gu Jin's injuries gradually recovered. A life-and-death realm martial artist's vitality far surpassed ordinary martial artists. Since it wasn't a fatal injury, and with the help of elixirs, it quickly recovered. Gu Jin's aura had calmed down a lot. She walked toward Chu Fengmian and hurriedly said, "Thank you for your help, Senior Chu. May I know why you came to the central region this time? My Gu family has some connections in the central region. We can help you to repay your kindness." "It's not a big deal. I came to the central region to participate in the 9 regions genius battle and to buy some elixirs for refining elixirs," Chu Fengmian said. His purpose was very clear, and there was nothing he couldn't say. The Nine Regions Genius Battle was attended by more than 1 million martial artists every year. It wasn't a big deal for Chu Fengmian to participate. Nine Regions Genius Battle? There's still a month before the Nine Regions Genius Battle. There's no hurry. As for buying elixirs, Gu Jin suddenly smiled and said with some pride on his face, "Our Gu family is the biggest family in Ning Province Ancient City. Most of the chambers of commerce have connections with us. Why don't you follow me to Ning Province Ancient City? Our Gu family can do business with you. As for the Nine Regions Genius Battle, there's a teleportation array in Ning Province Ancient City that can take you to the ancient fighting arena. Since that's the case, I'll accept your offer." Chu Fengmian nodded. "Then, please lead the way, Miss Gu." Chu Fengmian originally wanted to go to Ning Province Ancient City. It wasn't a bad idea to travel with Gu Jin. Moreover, the elixirs Chu Fengmian wanted to buy were mostly saint elixirs. Without connections, it wouldn't be easy to buy them. With Gu Jin's help, it would be a lot more convenient, so he didn't decline. There was still a month before the Nine Regions Genius Battle. Chu Fengmian could use this time to collect more saint elixirs. "Alright, please follow me, Senior Chu." Gu Jin's body moved before he turned into a ray of light and flew out of the Devil Valley. Chu Fengmian followed closely behind. Chu Fengmian followed Gu Jin, looking around as they flew. About 6 hours later, an enormous city appeared in front of Chu Fengmian. It was said to be an incomparably huge city, but in fact, its size was larger than countless countries. It was like a giant country. The tall city walls were at least 1,000 meters high. At a glance, it was unknown how many experts were hidden within. The ancient city of Ningzhou. Chu Fengmian still remembered a little about the central region. Ningzhou Ancient City was considered a huge commercial city in the central region. Although it wasn't ranked high in the central region, it was still much more prosperous than Beimang City in the north region. The martial artists that entered and exited were all lined up in a long line that was tens of thousands of meters long. Every martial artist that entered the city had to have their identity checked. If one wanted to line up to enter the city, it would take at least a few days. "We'll go straight in. There's no need to line up." Gu Jin saw Chu Fengmian's gaze and said with a smile. Her ray of light moved and flew towards the ancient city of Ningzhou. Chu Fengmian followed closely behind. Who are these people? They actually flew straight into the ancient city of Ningzhou? Are they tired of living? Why do we have to line up? These people can just fly straight in. Some of the martial artists in the line also saw the two rays of light flying in and said with some dissatisfaction, "Shh, are you tired of living? Those who can fly directly into the ancient city of Ningzhou are all big shot. Be careful not to let them hear you. Otherwise, you'll lose your life in vain." A cultivator at the side hurriedly said. Only then did the cultivator obediently shut his mouth, not daring to speak again. There were many such discussions. "Who is it? Halt!" Just as Chu Fengmian and Gu Jin's escape light landed in the sky above Ning Province Ancient City, two figures directly flew over. These two figures were both 5th level life and death realm martial artists. In some small places, people like them would be like old ancestors. However, in the ancient city of Ningzhou, they could only take on the role of patrolling guards to check on the situation. "It's me, Gu Jin. Let us pass quickly," Gu Jin said calmly. He was no longer surprised by this sight. "So it's young Lady Gu." The two guards saw Gu Jin and hurriedly let her go. The largest clan in the Ning Prefecture ancient city was the Gu clan. Hence, they did not dare to obstruct Gu Jin. Hence, they stepped aside and allowed Chu Fengmian and Gu Jin's figures to descend. "Jiner? Jiner is back?" Chu Fengmian and Gu Jin had just landed in the ancient city of Ningzhou when an anxious voice suddenly sounded. Along with this voice, an enormous pressure descended. Many of the martial artists around Chu Fengmian immediately knelt down on the ground. Even the 5th level life and death realm guards knelt down one after another. Chu Fengmian also felt the pressure, but when he circulated his spiritual power, the pressure on his body disappeared. However, Chu Fengmian could also feel that the owner of this pressure was definitely a big shot. A big shot at the 6th level of life and death steps, the heart-refining realm. He was only a step away from the 7th level of Emperor realm, the heavenly fate realm. Only such a person could have such a terrifying pressure. Gu Clan's clan head. The owner of Ningzhou Ancient City. Some of the surrounding martial artists said excitedly the moment they felt the pressure. This was a real big shot. It was rare for them to see such a big shot, but this time, he actually appeared. Jin, are you alright? A figure suddenly descended along with the pressure. He turned into a streak of light and arrived in front of Gu Jin, carefully sizing her up. Seeing that Gu Jin did not have any injuries, he slowly let out a sigh of relief. Father! Gu Jin looked at the Gu Clan's clan head and said in a low voice. She had left rashly this time and almost caused a disaster. She could not even protect herself. It's good that you're alright. Even if those people provoked you, you shouldn't have gone against the Blood Sword Archdevil. The Blood Sword Archdevil is cunning and hard to deal with. Fortunately, you returned safely without encountering any danger. Father, I know my mistake, Gu Jin hastily said in a low voice. She suddenly raised her head and looked at Chu Fengmian. Father, this is my benefactor. If not for Senior Chu's help, I would have died in the hands of the Blood Sword Archdevil. It was Senior Chu who killed the Blood Sword Archdevil. Chapter 836. What? You killed Blood Sword Demon Venerable? Hearing Gu Jin's words, Gu family head looked at Chu Fengmian with astonishment. Although Chu Fengmian's cultivation was at the peak of life and death realm, he was still a level higher than Blood Sword Demon Venerable. However, Blood Sword Demon Venerable was an extremely troublesome character. More than one peak life and death realm expert had died in his hand. Even some old ancestors who had transcended life and death realm couldn't escape from him. Such a troublesome demon venerable died in Chu Fengmian's hands, just like that? The moment the head of the Gu family looked at Chu Fengmian, he used his spiritual consciousness to quietly scan Chu Fengmian's body, as if he wanted to see through Chu Fengmian's origins. Ordinary peak life and death realm martial artists would never be able to hide from the Gu clan head's spiritual sense. However, what kind of character was Chu Fengmian? Not to mention the 6th step of life and death steps, a heart-refining realm martial artist, Chu Fengmian would never be able to hide from him. Even the mysterious Dean, who was close to the 9th step of life and death realm, couldn't see through Chu Fengmian's cultivation, let alone Gu family head. Gu family head scanned with his spiritual sense, but couldn't see through Chu Fengmian at all. His eyes revealed a trace of shock. It was rare for a life and death realm martial artist to be able to hide from his spiritual sense. This kind of strength was unfathomable, far from ordinary peak life and death realm martial artists. It was no wonder that Chu Fengmian could kill Blood Sword Demon Master. Gu family head looked at Chu Fengmian and said, "Very good, young man. There aren't many young people like you in the central region. You killed Blood Sword Demon Venerable, removing a scourge for the central region, and also saving my daughter. My Gu family owes you a debt of gratitude. Speak, what do you want?" Father, Senior Chu came to Ning Province Ancient City this time to buy some spirit herbs. Let my daughter handle it. Gu Jin took over the conversation and looked at Chu Fengmian. Senior Chu, please stay in Ning Province Ancient City for a few days and have a good rest. All right. Chu Fengmian nodded. There was still some time before the 9-region genius battle, so Chu Fengmian wasn't in a hurry. The panacea that Chu Fengmian wanted wasn't something that could be found overnight, so there was no harm in staying for a few days. Senior Chu, please. Gu Jin brought Chu Fengmian all the way to an inn. The second young miss has returned. This time, when the second young miss left to exorcise demons, we were extremely worried and went out to search for her several times. Suddenly, from not far away, a few figures suddenly walked over. There were a total of 4 young men. They were all dressed in luxurious clothes, revealing their noble status. None of them were weak. With a single glance, Chu Fengmian could tell that the strength of these 4 had at least reached the peak of life and death stage. Reaching the peak of life and death realm at such a young age was enough to be considered a somewhat famous genius in any faction. The young man, who seemed to be the leader of the group, looked somewhat similar to Gu Jin. He also seemed to be a member of the Gu clan. Last time, when the second miss left, we didn't manage to persuade her. It was also our responsibility. Fortunately, the second miss returned unscathed. Gu Quan, what are you doing here? Seeing the arrival of this group of people, Gu Jin's face slightly changed. There wasn't any surprise, but a trace of anger in her eyes. Of course, we're here to welcome the second Mississippi. Moreover, it's said that a sire saved the second miss this time. We're also here to see who it is. One of the martialists standing behind Gu Quan said icily. As the supervisor of Ning Province's ancient city, we naturally have to see who saved the second miss and whether it's a spy from the outside world. As the warrior spoke, his eyes were already firmly fixed on Chu Fengmian, as if he wanted to see through Chu Fengmian's origin. His gaze was full of hostility, as if he was treating Chu Fengmian as a spy. This sire is very unfamiliar. I wonder where you came from. What business do you have in Ning Province's ancient city? The warrior looked at Chu Fengmian and spoke as if he was giving an order, as if he was interrogating Chu Fengmian. Supervisor? Chu Fengmian's eyes flickered. He was no stranger to this title. The central region was a place where the 7 great sects reigned supreme. In every city and every force in the central region, there were disciples of the 7 great sects who acted as supervisors. They were there to monitor whether these forces dared to rebel against the 7 great sections. Although Ning Province's ancient city was located at the edge of the central region, it still couldn't escape the surveillance of the 7 great sections. Chu Fengmian could recognize the aura of the warrior in front of him at a glance. He was a disciple of the desolate ancient sect. The other 2 supervisors behind him were disciples of the Tianjian sect and the Jiuyu Valley. These 3 warriors were the spies that the 3 great sects had sent to Ning Province's ancient city. They were there to monitor every movement in Ning Province's ancient city. However, it was clear that they were now entangled with the Gu family's disciple. They didn't just want to supervise, but also had other intentions. That was why they were targeting Chu Fengmian. Desolate Iron Blood, don't go too far. This is Ning Province's ancient city. Senior Chu saved my life. Do you still want to interrogate him? While Chu Fengmian was thinking, Gu Jin suddenly spoke to the supervisor named Desolate Iron Blood. You don't have to worry about this matter. Second miss, you're wrong. As supervisors, we must interrogate any warrior of unknown origin who comes to Ning Province's ancient city. This is our duty. The desolate ancient sect's disciple, Desolate Iron Blood, said proudly. What's more, there have been so many changes in the Central Territory recently. Many disciples of the 9 Demons City have turned traitor and become devils. Many of these devils have come to the Central Territory. So, we have to properly interrogate these warriors of unknown origins. That's right, kid. Speak, who are you? Are you a devil of 9 Demons City? The Tianjian sect's supervisor beside Desolate Iron Blood looked at Chu Fengmian and said coldly. Look at how secretive this kid is. He's most likely the head of 9 Demons City. If you don't speak, don't blame us for being impolite. Capture this kid first and interrogate him properly. The Jiuyu Valley's supervisor said coldly. Waves of spiritual energy had already burst out and locked onto Chu Fengmian. In an instant, they were ready to attack Chu Fengmian. Gu Quan, don't go too far. Senior Chu is our Gu family's guest. Gu Jin looked at Gu Quan, who was standing at the forefront, and said coldly. She naturally knew who had caused all of this. Chapter 837. Senior Chu, be careful. Gu Quan has always been my enemy in the Gu family. He has always been against me and wanted to kill me. He was also the reason why I went to kill the Blood Sword Overlord. These three supervisors are Huang Tieshue Jianyu and Gongsun Ao. They are also geniuses among the disciples of the 7 major sections. They are extremely powerful and are invincible in the same realm. They are not easy to deal with, Gu Jin said to Gu Quan and secretly transmitted his voice to Chu Fengmian. The situation is not good now. Senior Chu, please leave and lie low for a while. I will return to repay Senior Chu for saving my life after this storm has passed. Lie low for a while? There's no need for that. It's just a bunch of trash. I will kill them if they dare to go against me. Chu Fengmian said casually. Chu Fengmian might give the disciples of other sects a chance if they provoked him. However, as long as the disciples of the 7 major sects dared to provoke Chu Fengmian would only have one choice, which was to kill them. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, Gu Jin was stunned. His eyes were filled with disbelief as he looked at Chu Fengmian. He reminded Chu Fengmian because he did not want Chu Fengmian to have a conflict with these people. After all, they were the disciples of the 7 major sections. In the central region, almost no one would dare to provoke them. Even some old ancestors who had transcended life and death would not easily provoke the disciples of the 7 major sections. However, Chu Fengmian's words meant that he did not put these 3 people in his eyes at all. Second miss, we are just following orders. You don't have to make things difficult for the 3 supervisors. The corners of Gu Quan's mouth curled into a sneer. His gaze towards Chu Fengmian also revealed some hostility and ridicule. 3 supervisors, please. Let's capture this man first and ask him about his identity. All right. The 3 inspectors roared at the same time. Suddenly, countless amounts of spiritual energy fell from the sky and transformed into an incomparably huge palm. It directly descended from the sky and directly grabbed at Chu Fengmian. The 3 of them did not hold back in the slightest when they attacked. They erupted with extremely frightening power. 2 of them attacked and suppressed Chu Fengmian's body, making him unable to move. He could not even escape. As for the desolate Iron Blood, it went all out to suppress Chu Fengmian. It planned to forcibly capture him. Brother Huang's great capturing hand is even more powerful than before. It's about to reach great success. Gu Quan chuckled as he spoke. His eyes were filled with disdain as he looked at Gu Jin, as though he was mocking him. A nameless brat dares to go against the disciples of the 7 major sects? Very well, I'll capture you first and torture you. Let's see if you'll obediently reveal your identity when the time comes. Huang Tieshue looked at Chu Fengmian and smiled ferociously. He waved his hand and grabbed at Chu Fengmian. In the blink of an eye, the huge palm fell in front of Chu Fengmian's body. It wanted to forcibly suppress Chu Fengmian's body. The other 2 supervisors sneered when they saw this scene. They did not expect that Chu Fengmian would still attack at this time. It was as though he had been scared silly. Originally, they thought that Chu Fengmian came to compete with them. They did not expect that he would be scared silly so quickly. The great capturing hand of desolate Iron Blood was something that only a few martial artists in the same realm could resist. Not to mention that Chu Fengmian had not made a move yet. It was as though he had been scared silly. Under such a situation, it was almost certain that Chu Fengmian would be suppressed by the palm. Senior Chu, Gu Jin called out worriedly from the side. If Chu Fengmian was really suppressed and fell into the hands of the 4 people, then Chu Fengmian would be completely finished. Even if he did not die, he would be seriously injured. The disciples of the 7 major sects would not show any mercy. The fluctuation of spiritual power attracted many martial artists in the surroundings to come over and watch. When they saw that Chu Fengmian's opponents were actually the 3 supervisors, many martial artists shook their heads. The 3 supervisors were almost invincible characters in the Ning province ancient city. Unless it was an old ancestor who had transcended life and death realm, no one would be their opponent. The martial artists present could only shake their heads. This was a case of having eyes but failing to see, provoking people who should not be provoked. Now that Chu Fengmian was at the peak of life and death realm, his suppression today could be considered as a matter of fact. Almost no one thought that Chu Fengmian could escape under such a terrifying suppression. At this time, the incomparably huge palm had already approached Chu Fengmian. It was only 3 feet away from Chu Fengmian. However, this 3 feet distance was as far as the horizon. When the incomparably huge palm was 3 feet away from Chu Fengmian's body, it seemed to be blocked by an invisible force. This caused the incomparably huge palm to be unable to take another step forward. It could no longer approach Chu Fengmian. You dare to be presumptuous in front of me with such strength? Chu Fengmian slowly raised his head, his eyes filled with a cold sneer. He slowly raised his palm, extended a finger, and pointed it forward. With a point of his finger, he turned into a beam of golden light and charged over. The gigantic palm was instantly destroyed by the golden light from the finger. All of its spiritual energy dissipated, leaving not a single trace behind. On the other hand, Chu Fengmian stood in the same place, unharmed. His feet didn't even move. He easily resolved all of this. What? How is this possible? He's unharmed? That's the great grappling hand, the supreme skill of the desolate ancient sect. This is impossible. Are my eyes playing tricks on me? The martial artists rubbed their eyes, as if they couldn't believe what had happened in front of them. The scene was in an uproar. The great grappling hand was blocked just like that? Jiuyu and Gongsun Ao were dumbfounded. Their eyes were filled with shock. Of course, the one who was most shocked was Desolate Ironblood. He knew the power of his great grappling hand very well. It could be said that there were very few martial artists in the same realm who could resist it. Just like before, Chu Fengmian didn't even take the initiative to attack. It was almost impossible for him to resist the great grappling hand. Now, he had the help of Jiuyu and Gongsun Ao. The 3 of them joined forces to suppress Chu Fengmian. Who would have thought that Chu Fengmian could break their joint forces with just a finger? Chapter 838. Who exactly is this person? At such a young age, he has already reached the peak of life and death realm. Which faction has nurtured such a genius? Since when did such a person appear in our central region? He's actually able to force back the 3 inspectors. This person's strength is absolutely monstrous. Moreover, did you see this person's move? It's not a cultivation technique belonging to the 7 great sections. There's actually such a monstrous genius outside of the 7 great sects. Sounds of discussion rang out from the crowd and did not stop for a long time. They were all aware of the strength of the 3 inspectors. They came from the 7 great sects and were practically invincible in the same realm. Ordinary life and death realm martial artists wouldn't be able to withstand more than a few moves from them. But now, Chu Fengmian casually pointed a finger and displayed strength that vaguely surpassed the 3 inspectors. How could the crowd not be amazed? Huang Tieshua looked at Chu Fengmian with incomparable fear in his eyes. Originally, in his opinion, Chu Fengmian was an ant that he could casually crush. He didn't need to use too many methods to kill Chu Fengmian. He could just suppress and kill Chu Fengmian first. But now, in this short exchange, Huang Tieshua naturally understood that Chu Fengmian's strength was far greater than he imagined. Who are you? Huang Tieshua looked at Chu Fengmian and coldly said. The threat in his words was self-evident. As inspectors, we have the qualifications to interrogate you. If you don't answer, we'll have to call the experts of our sections. At that time, you'll become a wanted criminal of our 7 great sections. Do you understand? A wanted criminal of the 7 great sects? What? Do you think I'll be afraid of you just because you mention the 7 great sects? Chu Fengmian's eyes revealed some disdain as he laughed and said. There's no harm in telling you. My name is Chu Fengmian. That's the name. I don't know if you've heard of it. Chu Fengmian. Hearing this name, the three inspectors' eyes flickered as if they were thinking about something. Suddenly, the three people's faces changed greatly, and their eyes were filled with killing intent. Chu Fengmian? It's you! A few days ago, this name had caused a huge uproar among the seven great sects. It was said that all the disciples of the seven great sects had been killed by a martialist called Chu Fengmian. Although they were outside, they had also heard of this matter. They had not expected that they would actually meet Chu Fengmian here. Ha 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 ha, I didn't expect it to be you, Chu Fengmian. You killed countless disciples of our seven great sects, and you still dare to set foot in the central region today. Huang Tieshua looked at Chu Fengmian and suddenly laughed. I originally thought that you were hiding in the northern region like a coward. I didn't expect that you would actually dare to set foot in the central region. You're really bold. Chu Fengmian, you are a wanted criminal of the seven great sects. We, the seven great sects, have given the order that as long as anyone meets you, they can kill you and take your head to ask for benefits. I didn't expect that we would actually meet you. The Tianjian sects, Jian Yu suddenly seemed to be overjoyed and laughed loudly. Good. Good. There wasn't much to gain from coming to this damned place, and now Chu Fengmian appeared. Very good, you are now a thorn in the side of countless patriarchs. Killing you can exchange for countless rewards. Gongsun Ao looked at Chu Fengmian as if he was looking at an incomparably huge treasure. They were all aware of what Chu Fengmian had done in the Omega Ruins sky. It was said that Chu Fengmian had obtained countless treasures from the Omega Ruins sky. The three of them had also been to the Omega Ruins sky, a place that was full of treasures, so they naturally knew about it. Killing Chu Fengmian was no less than obtaining an incomparably huge treasure. Kill. The three inspectors acted without any hesitation, leaving no room for explanation. Waves of spiritual power burst out, causing countless martial artists to retreat. The sky was filled with bloody light and countless killing moves, all bombarding Chu Fengmian. Senior Chu, be careful. Gu Jin did not immediately know where Chu Fengmian came from, but when she saw this scene, she hurriedly reminded him. After all, Chu Fengmian had saved her life. Gu Jin was unwilling to see him die in the hands of these three inspectors. Just three trash. I've already given you a chance before. Since you still dare to court death, I'll fulfill your wish. Chu Fengmian said indifferently. Three trash? Hearing this title, countless martial artists present had different looks in their eyes. Disciples from the seven great sects were called geniuses wherever they went. Even if they were not revered by everyone, they were still praised endlessly. But now, from Chu Fengmian's mouth, the three of them were actually called trash? How arrogant must a person be to say such words? Even some patriarchs who had transcended life and death didn't dare to say such word. Moreover, Chu Fengmian was not an patriarch who had transcended life and death. He was also a peak life and death expert like the three inspectors. Chu Fengmian was actually so confident in fighting one against three? Arrogant. Kid, you're just a frog at the bottom of a well from the desolate land of the North region. You're about to die, yet you're still so arrogant. Hearing Chu Fengmian call them trash, Huang Tieshue's face was filled with anger. Since when were the disciples of the seven great sects called trash? This Chu Fengmian's character was incomparably arrogant. Die for me. Great desolate palm. Huang Tieshue's spiritual power erupted. An ancient aura fused into his palm, turning into an ancient palm that descended from the sky. Frog at the bottom of a well? Chu Fengmian's figure moved. With a wave of his sleeve, a surge of spiritual power soared into the sky. Break for me. This palm didn't even have time to approach Chu Fengmian before it was shattered by Chu Fengmian's spiritual power. It couldn't harm Chu Fengmian in the slightest. Even the killing move of the desolate Iron Blood was so weak in front of Chu Fengmian. It was easily neutralized by him. Damn it! What kind of means does this kid have? Didn't he just come out from the returning ruined sky? How can he have such terrifying strength? Huang Tieshua's palm was neutralized just like that. His face was also extremely ugly. More than a month ago, Chu Fengmian was just a nobody. Although he was the first on the list of top 100 talents in the North region, he was not taken seriously at all. After all, the North region was a desolate place. Being the first on the list of top 100 talents in the North region was nothing. When Chu Fengmian wantonly killed in the returning ruined sky, he just thought that Chu Fengmian was just a lucky kid who had obtained some opportunities. How could he have known that Chu Fengmian's strength was far beyond his? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.